And where we are in the throes of our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. So we're going to finish that discussion. We're going to get through Unit 8 today, which means we do have some math. So probably next break or the following break, we'll get into some math. So if you don't have your calculators, you want to get them at least by next break. So we were talking about our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And where we left off specifically was talking about seller acknowledgement. And there's certain things that the seller has to acknowledge that they understand, acknowledge that, you know, they agree to. So like we were talking about the other day, I have zero control of Zillow, and I mean zero control of Zillow. So what the seller's listing looks like on Zillow, you know, they take the feed from the MLS. Not all fields always match. And remember, we said too, Zillow is just an example. When I put my listing in MLS, it goes to thousands of websites. And I'm not over exaggerating when I say that. So the seller needs to understand that I only have so much control over the internet. We also, the other thing we talked about, I think the last thing we were talking about before we leave in was the control of visitors in the house. You'd like to think that all buyers agents and all buyers are respectful. There's been stories, so many stories over the year where that's not always the case. So we'll talk about working with buyers in just a minute, and kind of the importance of making sure your buyers are respecting the seller's home, understanding that it is still the seller's home. So if the seller asks you to remove your shoes before you walk in their front door, you take your shoes off, and you have your buyers do the same thing. Their house, their rules. So we're going to honor their request. We were talking about the sellers packing stuff up, right? I want them to depersonalize anyway, because it's really hard for a buyer to imagine themselves living here when they're looking at pictures of your kids, right? So it's hard for them to picture. So if we can depersonalize, if we can take some of the personal effects down. Remember too, I'm selling space, not stuff. So the more stuff we can get out of the home, the more we can see the space. I understand they're still living there. I get that. But we need to be able to have the buyers imagine themselves living there as well. So having the seller especially secure all valuables. We don't want to leave temptation out. So just put something out that, you know, put it up. Y'all, I just heard this yesterday. One of my teammates yesterday told me that he was out showing a property. He was with buyers and he was showing a property, and there was a handgun on top of the refrigerator. There was another handgun on one of the shelves of the cabinet, like an open shelf. He said there was like 3 guns just laying out. And you know what? I'm not here to talk about whether or not we are or are not for guns. But how dangerous is that? What if a kid got a hold of that? What if the wrong buyer got a hold of that? What if the buyer said, gee, this looks good, I'm going to come back later in the middle of the night and take advantage of the situation? You guys with me? So he called the listing agent after the showing. He was so upset. He was like, you need to talk to your sellers. He's like, that's just not acceptable to leave. You know, if you have guns, great, just put them up. That's all we're saying. Reagan, I need you to rename yourself. I don't recognize that name. Okay. So seller acknowledges certain things. Again, we'll talk more about working with buyers in just a minute. We need to advise the sellers about video and audio recording. The sellers can have video. They can have video recording in their home. They can't have audio. So, you know, the Ring doorbell, if you want to have, you know, camera up to see somebody in your house. If I was going to have a bunch of people in my house, I'd probably put a camera up just to make sure. But what the sellers can't have is audio. So they need to either, you know, have this conversation with them that they turn that off, or not have it to begin with. As a buyer's agent, I discuss this with my buyer, because even though sellers shouldn't have audio on, I have no guarantee that they don't. And why do I care about buyers? Well, Buyer walks in the front door, looks at the carpet and goes, oh God, that's tacky carpet. Whatever, I don't care about that. That's their opinion. They're entitled to that. What I don't want is the buyer to walk in the front door and look at me and say, Julie, this is my dream home. I will do anything to get this house. If the sellers just heard that, what did they hear? Cha-ching, 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 right? They heard dollar signs. They heard money. So have the conversation with your buyers that even though they shouldn't have audio, just be careful about what they say in the home. They're entitled to their opinion, but let's not hurt their negotiating power. Some of my buyers get so cute. They're like terrified to say anything inside, and they wait to get it all out when we get outside. They'll do it and it all comes out, but they're just so, but that's okay. You know, again, it's more about just letting them know. And guys, as far as cameras go, come on, it's 2022. We might as well conduct our lives as if we're on video camera, because you know what? There's a really good chance that we probably are. So keep that in mind. You're in somebody else's home. Earnest money, we talk about the seller, about the earnest money in our listing agreement. I am going to hold off on this conversation. We're going to talk about earnest money when we look at our offer to purchase and contract. We're going to talk about the trust account when we get into license law and commission rules. So let's hold off on earnest money. We'll talk about that later. The seller has to make some representations to the firm. So the seller has to represent how long, the length of time that they've owned the property. The seller has to represent whether they are or are not in bankruptcy. They have to represent the property has legal access to a public road. Is there a manufactured mobile home on the property? Is there an HOA? If so, what is that HOA information? We're going to put some sample forms in the seller's hands. Specifically, we're going to leave them a sample offer to purchase and contract. That's the form. Offer to purchase and contract is what we'll look at in Unit 10. I think it's a good idea for sellers to look at that ahead of time, because when we get an offer, this is what it's going to come on. This is what it's going to look at like. So we can get them a sample in their hand now so they can start looking it over. They're representing if they are or not in a flood hazard. They're representing if their home has previously been clad in synthetic stucco. We talked about that with our material facts. Is there a termite bond on the property? And then the seller has to represent any current liens on the property. So remember my pre-listing appointment, I asked the seller to start gathering their mortgage or mortgages. So they're gathering that information, and I'm looking for an approximate balance. I don't need an exact amount. I just need an approximate balance. And as the listing agent, I need to pay attention to this, because if this list adds up, those dollars add up. And if I fear that the seller owes more than the home is worth, the seller has more liens on the property than what we can sell the property for, that means the seller's underwater. And before I list their property, if I suspect that that seller's underwater, we need to talk to the seller about the fact of, you're probably going to have to bring money to the closing table. Not all sellers get money from closing. If they're underwater, they have to bring money. Let's not wait till we get to the closing table to find out that the seller doesn't have any money to bring. Okay, so if those liens, if those balances start adding up, the seller might be a possibility for a short sale if they owe more than what it's worth. We're going to talk all about short sales in units 14 and 15, our financing units. But again, it's important that they acknowledge their loans and their approximate balances, and understand too, the attorney may find something in the title search that the seller doesn't know about. The seller may or may not know if they have a mechanic's lien on them, for example. So these are just liens that they know of, that they can represent, and we need to make sure that they can afford to sell their house with all their closing expenses and anything. Any thoughts or comments on that? We're getting pretty personal with the seller, aren't we? We just met him, and all of a sudden I'm saying how much money you owe, but you're doing it not only to protect them when we get to the closing table, but you got to protect yourself too. I'd hate for you guys to go through the whole transaction just to find out the seller can't sell because they can't bring money. Ouch. Comments on that? Rebecca's walking in the door saying, how much do you owe? It's a very good. When we talk about our financing units, we had the housing market crash, 08, 09, 2010. I don't know if you guys remember hearing about that. Back in the housing market crash, sellers bringing money to the closing table was very common. How common is it today? Probably, it's still out there. Absolutely. It's not as common as what it was back in the housing market crash. We'll talk a little bit more about the housing market crash when we get to units 14 and 15. But it can happen. Wow. So Christina remembers the housing market crash. I'm sorry to hear that. It was a rough time. It was a rough time. I'm proud to say, I mean, I was still an admin back in those days. I wasn't in sales yet, but even as an admin, I mean, they cut our hours, right? Because it was short. Everything was short. It was crazy. It was crazy. But we survived and we came out the other end. And now we're in this market where sellers, guys, housing market crash wasn't, but what year is this? 12, 13 years ago, something like that. The sellers had zero power, zero control. That pendulum swung back. And now the sellers are the ones in power. See how that works? That pendulum will come back one day too. So it depends on where the pendulum is. I have predictions for the future, Demario, and we'll talk about that. Yep, I'll whip out my crystal ball in our financing units, and I'll talk about where I think what this market, because there's going to be consequences of this market with low inventory, with 45 offers on one property. There's going to be consequences from this market. And I'll whip out my crystal ball in financing and we'll talk about, and you guys can come back 10 years from now and tell me if I was right or not. Okay. So current liens, we're getting awfully deep and personal with the seller very early. The seller has to acknowledge if there's any leases on the property. We're going to talk about leases. Is there an existing tenant in place? Is there an existing lease? If so, the new buyer is going to have to honor that existing lease, at least through its term. So we'll talk about that. We've got landlord tenant unit is unit 11. Has there been an FHA appraisal on the property? Is there a fuel tank on the property? These are all things that the seller is representing to the firm. They're telling the firm, yes or no, there's a fuel tank on the property. And then remember we said our listing agreement was a two-way street. So both parties owe duties and responsibilities to each other. So Tuesday we saw the duties that the firm owes the seller. So now we're looking at the duties that the seller owes the firm. And probably one of the biggest duties that the seller owes the firm is to cooperate with them in marketing and selling your property. We mentioned the other day that if I list your home for sale and you never allow a showing, it's going to be really hard for me to sell your house. Can we agree with that? If you do not let a single buyer in the front door, it's going to be really hard for me to sell your house. In addition to allowing me to show your property, the seller has certain disclosures, and we were getting ready to talk about those within the hour. So we'll see our seller disclosures in just a second. But they have a duty to complete those to help us get that information to the buyer to provide them. So we'll talk about our disclosures. This paragraph is like a big review from units 2, 3, 5, and 6. Check it out. The seller has a duty to deliver a general warranty deed that conveys fee simple marketable title, including legal access, free of all encumbrances, except ad valorem taxes, easements, unviolated restrictive covenants, encumbrances, Boy, wasn't that just a good review of the first 6 units? That pretty much just sums it up right there. Why do we spend time with the first 6 units that we do? Because that information is mentioned in our listing agreement. It's talked about in our buyer's agency agreement. We have it in our offer to purchase and contract. This again mentions if the seller's a consideration for short sales. We'll talk about short sales when we get to financing. Is the seller, some sellers have what's called a pre-listing inspection or pre-home inspection. So they may want to have a home inspection done. They may choose to have a home inspection done before we list the property. This isn't highlighted, I know, but I just want to mention this real quick. Photographs and other materials. When I come into your home and take pictures of your home, those pictures are my property. That's my work. They may be pictures of your home, but it's my work. So those pictures are mine. They belong to me. If the listing expires and you hire another firm, that new firm needs to come in and take their own pictures. They can't come in and take mine. Does that make sense? And that's what we're telling the seller here. This is my pictures. Question comes in, do you take pictures? If you don't, you hire somebody to do it. There's additional terms and conditions. This is anything that seller and firm agree to. That's not in the terms of the agreement. So the possibilities here are endless. If there's something you guys are in agreement to, you want to get it in writing, right? Because if you got verbal, you got what? Absolutely nothing. So if the seller and the firm agree to something, you want to put it in additional terms. Check it out. Page 10, we start explaining dual agency to the seller. So there's a whole explanation here that I think you guys should read because it's another way to expose yourself to dual agency. So we can use this information. Don't read it to the seller. Nobody wants to be read to, but use this information to help put words in your mouth to explain dual agency as it relates, as it pertains to the seller. And then you'll note we have a place for the seller to authorize the firm to act as a dual agent, or they do not authorize the firm to act as a dual agent. The seller needs to initial one or the other, either yes to dual agency or no to dual agency. If they say yes to dual agency, then we can give them the option. If the firm offers it, we can give them the option of designated dual agency. So again, I think for you guys, these forms are another good way to see this information that we're talking about, and we're going to keep continuing to talk about. So use the forms to help give you another way to expose. And we'll see dual agency explanation in the buyer's agency agreement. Mediation, this just says if it disputes, we'd rather handle it mediation instead of going to court. Wire fraud warning. Wire fraud got really big, really fast in real estate. So just eat for you. So wire fraud, sorry guys. Wire fraud got really big, really fast in real estate. So we have to warn the sellers about wire fraud in the listing agreement. We warn the buyers about wire fraud in the buyer's agency agreement. And we warn both buyers and sellers about wire fraud in our offer to purchase and contract. So let's hold off on the wire fraud discussion until we get to unit 10 when we look at our offer to purchase and contract. But again, you guys can look at this ahead of time. So the last of the agency agreement, the listing agreement, excuse me, that we have a place for two sellers to sign and their contact information. So they're going to print their name, they're going to sign, and their contact information. If you have more than two sellers, and let me say this, everybody on the deed and their spouses need to sign the listing agreement. I need to know from day one that they're on board. So if let's say it's an heir situation and there's 10 heirs and all 10 heirs are married. There's 20 people that have to show up on closing day to sign that deed. And if I have one of those people that's unwilling to sign the listing agreement, I should have a flag go up, right? because if only 19 are on board at the beginning, I can't convey it if all 20 don't show up at closing. So my listing agreement only gives me a place for 2 sellers to sign. I have an additional signatures addendum that allows for other, I think there's 8 more signatures allowed. So you can use as many additional signature addenda as you need to get all of the sellers on board, to get all of the sellers to sign the listing agreement, sign the offer to purchase and contract. That's one way you know that they're going to be on board to show up, because if they don't show up, if they all don't show up, if only 19 show up on closing day, then you can't convey the property. So make sure everybody's on the same page on day 1. If the seller is an entity, if they're a business, then they have a separate place to sign. If they're an entity, they're going to have one person allowed to sign on behalf of the entity. So they will sign on behalf. And then you and I sign. So there's a place for us to print our firm name, our firm license number, signed by the individual agent, and our license number. So Florida is a different state. I don't know Florida state rules. So that is our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Questions or comments on this? I really encourage you guys to look it over. Remember, the commission says in your book on pages 216 to 221, it pulls out specific provisions that they think you will want to know. That's what I've gone through and highlighted in the listing agreement from the book on pages 216 to 2, what did I just say, 2 something, 21. Questions or comments? Yeah, it's what we were just looking at, learn, test, pass. It's right here. I agree, Rebecca. I think this does a good job. Again, you guys, back in my administrative days, I did new agent training. So I got you guys as soon as you came out of pre-licensing class, as soon as you got your license. And the number one concern I always heard was, I don't know what to say. What do I say when I'm looking at a seller? What do I say when I'm looking at a buyer? And my answer was, if you're familiar with the forms, everything you need to know to say is right here. They give it to you. Don't sit down and read this to them, but be familiar with the forms so you know how you can have these conversations. Other questions or comments? So still in talking with sellers, one thing that conversation we need to have, one thing we need to help the sellers with, and this is another one, is you guys, let me get this out and then I'll open it up for questions. But another thing that we do as a listing agent is determine square footage, specifically heated living area criteria. Could also be known as total living area, total heated living. They'll mash that up any way they can. In order for me to count a space as heated living area or total heated living area, I must have these 3 things. If I don't have these 3 things, then I can't count it in the heated living area, the heated living square foot. So in order for me to count it, the space has to be adequately heated by a permanently installed heating system. You cannot put a space heater in a room and say, oh, this space is heated. It's got to be heated by a permanently installed heating system. And please note, this says heated. This does not say air conditioned. AC is a luxury. So the space has to be heated. It's got to be finished to generally accepted level of construction. I need finished floors, finished walls. I need finished ceiling with ceiling heights of 7 feet. Ceiling heights of 7 feet. If, for example, you're in an attic with a bonus room, and sometimes those walls are sloped, if the slope is 5 feet, I can count that as heated living area. I'm on page 221 and 222 in your book. You guys don't see my page numbers at the bottom there? And then the space has to be directly accessible from other heated living space. You need to be able to walk from space to space to space. Let's say, for example, you're listing a home and there's a finished room over the garage. Finished room over the garage, or a frog. So there's a frog over the garage. In order to get to the stairs to access the frog, you have to walk through the unfinished garage. Because it's not directly accessible, because I have to walk through the garage, I can't count that frog in my total heated living area. Now, I can advertise it, and I'm going to, 400 extra square feet over the finished over the garage. Finished room over garage. So if I have to walk through something that's not finished or not adequately heated, then I can't count it. So this is about the time in the class I get all the questions. Well, my uncle has a space that it has concrete walls. Can he count it? No, because it's not finished to generally accepted level of construction. Well, I saw this space once that didn't have flooring. It was still on plywood. Can I count it? No, because it's not finished. It's not adequately heated. Everybody hear me? I can't see the space. I can't tell you if it counts or not. So stop and ask yourself, does it have these 3 things? If it has these 3 things, then you can count it as heated living area or total heated square foot. Here's the deal about square foot in North Carolina. Square foot in North Carolina is not a material fact. The Real Estate Commission does not consider square foot a material fact. However, if we report it, we're liable for any misrepresentation. We have a duty to report it accurately. In the Triad MLS, I cannot speak for any other MLS, but in the Triad MLS, total heated square footage is a required field. So even though the Real Estate Commission doesn't require it, the Triad MLS does. What's your test going to ask you about? It's going to ask you about the Real Estate Commission. So let's just review real quick. We specifically said some things that are not considered a material fact in North Carolina. Stigmatized properties, presence of convicted sex offenders nearby, and now we're going to add square foot to the list. To report the square footage, you are responsible, you are liable. So either you go out, you get the training and you learn how to properly measure a home, or you pay somebody to do it. And when you're paying somebody to do it, you're paying somebody with more experience than you. You're paying a seasoned agent, or you're paying an appraiser. You're paying somebody with more experience, because no matter who does it, you're responsible for it. So don't hire the college kid that has never measured a house before, but he's willing to do it for 50 bucks. Because when that college kid goes out and does it for 50 bucks, you're still responsible for it. You guys with me? So either you learn how to do it and you go out and do it yourself, or you pay somebody with more experience. Square footage and material fact, nationally speaking, no, it varies. Like I said, there's an MLS up in the highlands in North Carolina that square footage is not required. Like I said, I can only speak for Triad MLS. So some MLSs require it, some don't. What are you going to be tested on? The North Carolina Real Estate Commission. What's the North Carolina Real Estate Commission say? It's not a material fact. You'll find out all about your MLS when you join your MLS. I'm either doing the work or I'm paying somebody to do it. I'm not relying on tax records. Those things are very rarely right. I can't rely on builders' blueprints. And I can't go back to previous MLS listings. Again, another agent, another firm did that work, and I cannot steal somebody else's work. Question came in, you either have to pay it or do it yourself every time, every listing. Yeah. All homes have different square footage. Some MLSs will report square footage as a range. That's just to give some error for wiggle room, or wiggle room for error. I said that backwards. This is talking about total heated square footage. You may, in addition, want to put like the room dimensions. So you may want to put the dimensions of the kitchen, the dining room, the bedrooms, etc. Again, if you do it, if you report it, you're liable for any misrepresentation. As a buyer's agent, we need to be able to look for red flags when it comes to square footage. Guys, I have 0 dimensional capabilities. I cannot look at a space and say, oh, a couch will fit there. Like, I just have 0 dimensional. But I should know enough. Let's say, for example, this room, I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. Let's just say this room is about 400 square feet. If the MLS advertises this room as 900 square feet, I should be able to walk in here and go, gosh, this doesn't look like 900 square feet, right? Now, I'm not cutting hairs. What's the difference in 400 square feet and 420 square feet? Nobody can look at that with the naked eye, right? But I should be able to walk into space and say, this just doesn't feel like 900 square feet. If you or your buyer ever have any questions about the square footage of a room or a property, you need to help your buyer verify that. So we should be able to rely on the information unless a red flag goes up. And if a red flag goes up, if your buyer walks in this room and says, really, this is 900 square feet, the best thing you can do is run out to your car and get your measurer and measure it for them. I have a laser measurer. And brag about my toys again. I got to talk about my coffee pot earlier. So now my laser measurer, it's really cool. You hold it up to the wall, you point it to the other wall, boop, you hit the button, he tells you how many feet and inches. And then you go to this wall, hold it up, do it again, boop, it tells you how many feet and inches. It was a gift from Santa when I got into sales. Google it after class. I don't know how much it costs. Or you can get your tape measure, however you want to go. But if your buyer ever has a question, Julie, are you sure this is 900? Well, let's go out. Yeah, it's a laser measurer. You hold it and the laser shoots across the room and you hit boop and it tells you how many feet and inches. When we measure, let's see if I can't get my zoom bar out of the way here. When we measure, let's pretend this is our house. When we measure, we typically start by measuring from the outside. So we go outside and we go from corner to corner. For this, you can't use a laser measurer because you need somewhere for it to end. So you want to get like one of those 100 feet cloth tapes or something. They'll talk about the tools you need to measure. But you start from the outside and you get all of the square footage under the roof. And then you go inside and deduct something that doesn't count. So for example, once you get the total, then you go inside and you deduct the garage, the unfinished garage. So whatever that square footage is, and that gives you your heated square footage. If you have a property, and I feel bad for you guys when I have to draw, I'm sorry, so kind of bear with me. If you have a property, for example, that you can't get to the outside to measure. So let's say the first floor, this is the ground on the first floor, but the second floor is bigger than the first floor. So I can measure the first floor on the outside, but I can't safely measure the second floor on the outside, right? So if you can't get to the outside to measure, then you go inside and you measure from the inside. You'll want to measure exterior walls. So exterior walls versus interior walls. Exterior walls, the other side of the wall is the outside. Interior walls, the other side of the wall is another room in the house. Okay, so you measure your exterior walls from the inside, and then you add 6 inches. So if you ever can't get to measure outside, you go inside, you measure the exterior walls, and you add 6 inches, and that'll give you the heated square foot. And then take out anything that doesn't count. It's not adequately heated, directly accessible, and finished. The exception to this rule are condos, because condo owners own from paint to paint, right? Sheetrock to sheetrock. So condos, when you're measuring condos, you go inside, you measure exterior walls, and you don't add 6 inches. You just measure your exterior walls and don't add 6 inches. If you're going to measure, again, you're going to get lots of training. You're going to go with an experienced agent. You may get to hold the dummy end of the measuring tape. And when you get your first listing, somebody will probably be with you. Now they're holding the dummy end, making sure you're getting it right. You will get training. I promise you, the first house you go to measure, it's going to feel like it's going to take forever. But I tell you, the more you measure, the easier it gets, the better it gets. The other piece of advice I have for you, if you're going to measure your own, get you some rubber boots. Because when you're outside measuring exterior, you're going to be tromping around in bushes and shrubs, and things back there slither and crawl. So you have a choice. I see y'all's face. You have a choice. You either get some rubber boots and do it yourself, or hire somebody to do it. I'm giving you choices. I've never had anything slither or crawl over my foot because my instructor gave me that free. That was one of the rubber boots, one of the first, that terrified me. And rubber boots is one of the first things I ever bought when I got into sales. When we leave today, and please help me remember, I should have a note somewhere. Please help me remember if I forget. When we leave today, I got a video I'm going to put in the chat for you guys to look at this weekend. It's a video on measuring. The Winston-Salem Board of Realtors and Piedmont Federal Bank came together and did this video, and it's about an 8-minute video. There's more in the video than what you guys need for your exam. What you need for your exam is in that video, but I think it kind of gives you the visual of what we're talking about right now. And that video is one of a 5-part series. So the video I'm sharing with you guys is kind of the overall introduction. Once you watch that video, you'll be able to see the other 4, but like the second video is specifically about measuring a ranch. The third video is specifically about measuring a 2-story home. So the 2 through 5th videos kind of gives you ideas on measuring different types of properties. So if I forget, please help me. I got a note, but that doesn't mean anything. I know me. So help me remember to do that after class. When it comes to basements, there's above grade property and there's below grade property. Above grade property, the home doesn't touch the earth. Below grade, at least one side of the home touches the earth. We're not expected we don't have a duty to report above grade or below grade, but this is something that the appraiser is going to look at. The appraiser tends to put less value on below grade. So again, this isn't something that we're reporting, but we need to be aware when we're helping the seller price the property, if they have a below grade portion of the home, then we need to, just have the conversation about how the, above grade, below grade. This picture you're looking at, the first level here with the garage, this is considered above grade. This second level, this bottom level would be considered below grade, because you see this side touches the home, probably the back side. So if any portion of that level touches the earth, then it's considered below grade. All right, y'all got your books handy? Let's go together. Hold your place in the Unit 8. But let's go together. Let's turn to page 743. Appendix C on page 743 is your residential square footage guidelines. Let's go ahead and call Appendix C your measuring Bible. You will get a copy of this when you affiliate with your firm. Probably the Real Estate Commission provides these nice little brochures. That brochure was translated into Appendix C in your textbook. So you'll see this again. Over on page 744, 744 explains the things that we talked about. So that gray box on the left discusses above grade and below grade. The column on the right on 744, there's our 3 criteria, the 3 things we have to have in order to count it. 744 talks about some specifics. Like, does the chimney count? Does the, I don't know how much of that you need to know for your test. I don't think it hurts you to look it over. And the video that I'm going to give you guys talks about like attics and bonus rooms, that kind of thing. So for your exam, if I were you, 744 is the big page for your exam. 745 can't hurt you to take a look at it. Once you get your license, the rest of this is going to be good. So you're welcome to look at it now to give you a better idea. But specifically, for example, what I like so much about this book, turn with me to page 750 and 751. 750 and 751. Once you get the directions out of the way, it kind of turns into a workbook. So there's a diagram, there's measurements, there's a workbook for measuring a 1-story with a basement and a carport. 752 is a workbook for measuring a 2-story with an open foyer. 754 is a workbook for measuring 2-story with a bonus room. You see what we're doing? So it's giving you some guidelines on some different property types. We're going to talk about basic residential construction. That's Unit 16. So we'll look at some architectural designs when we get to Unit 16. So again, for your exam, what we just talked about, 744, 745, and I think watch the video. It's a little, about 8 minutes or so. But again, I think they do a really, really good job. Okay, questions about measuring?
You talked about measuring the outside of a house and then deducting like the inside. So like go on the inside of the garage to deduct it, not trying to do that on the outside.
Well, if I start with like, for example, let's say my home, here's the home, right? And then maybe the garage looks something like this, right? Mm-hmm. So the garage kind of pokes out a little bit. when I'm outside, I can't see that this is a garage. When I'm outside, all I can see is corner to corner to corner, right? Space to space. And then once I get the total, then I go inside and measure the garage because that's not finished. That doesn't count.
Mhm.
So I'd have to get the total and then go inside and deduct what doesn't count.
Okay.
Because when I'm outside, I don't know where the garage starts and ends. Right? I don't see that until I get inside. Seven. You're not going to have to measure anything for your test. So yeah. You're not going to have to, which is why we said, that's for after. That's for once you get your license. Good practice, good way to learn how to, but your test isn't going to ask you to measure anything. Other questions about measuring? Again, training, practice, follow an experienced agent, let an experienced agent follow you when you get your first couple listings. And I'm here to tell you too, every single house is different. They are not all perfect rectangles. So a lot of learning how to measure just comes with experience. Okay. Another thing we're going to help the seller determine when listing their property, probably one of the big things, who would pay for hiring someone to measure? Well, I guess you would. I guess you could ask your seller to pay for it, but if you're in a competitive listing appointment and you're telling the seller you need them to pay for measuring and another agent is not, they may see it as an advantage not to pay, Another thing that we need to help the seller, okay, let's see, internal fireplace. Fireplaces get tricky. So I direct you to Appendix C, to that page that talks about fireplaces. It depends on where the hearth is. The video talks about fireplaces too. So I'll let you look at the video in Appendix C for that. Yep. Okay. Another thing we're going to help the seller determine before we list their property is price. The seller and I need to come to an agreement on an appropriate listing price. And when the seller asks me, what are we going to list my house for? I'm not just blurting a number out, right? I'm going to do what's called a comparative market analysis, also known as a CMA. We're going to talk all about the CMA in Unit 17. So we're not going to say a whole lot about it here, but basically what the CMA does is it looks at recently sold closed comps nearby. So within this subdivision or this neighborhood, something that closed within the last 6 months. And we're comparing that to the property I want to list. Because what I know for sure by looking at that CMA is that a buyer was willing to pay for a similar property nearby. They were recently willing to pay X amount. So based on what the buyer was recently willing to pay for it, that's going to help me determine what a buyer will be willing to pay for my listing. So when we do CMAs for sellers, we're giving them probable sales price. CMA is not an appraisal. Again, Unit 17 is our appraisal unit. So we're going to talk more about CMAs, appraisals. We actually get to do CMAs. We'll do some math with CMAs. figure out some pricing in unit 17. And we mentioned this the other day when we talked about our listing agreement, but it's really important, so it's worth mentioning again. I can't ask the seller to sign a listing agreement until we've decided on price. I mean, we're not supposed to sign anything if it's not complete anyway, but very important. Don't just sign this. We'll come up with price later. No, we need to be on agreement with price before we enter into a legally binding contract. So we have this discussion, we do the CMA, we're all on the same board. Now I can say sign here. Another thing, y'all put your pencils down for a second because it's not on the test. I'm going to go off the syllabus for a second. Another tool that we use, I can't spell. When we're helping the seller determine price, and more importantly, how long to have the listing agreement. Another tool that we use is something called absorption rate pricing. This is becoming very common, very popular. I promise you will see this when you affiliate with your firm. I say give this about 2 to 3 years, and we're going to start seeing this show up in pre-licensing because it's becoming another way to help the sellers. And what absorption rate pricing looks at is the average days on market in this area. So when you're having the conversation with the sellers about how long the listing agreement is for, when is your expiration date? If you do your absorption rate pricing and you see the average days on market is, I don't know, 60 days, it takes 60 days of being listed for a property to sell. That absorption rate pricing can help you determine, help the seller determine the expiration date. How long is this listing agreement for? And if the average of the absorption rate pricing says it takes, like I said, 60 days to sell, don't agree to a listing agreement for 30 days, right? The market is telling you it's going to take me 60 days to sell this house. So you want your listing agreement to give yourself time. Again, you're not tested on that yet. Questions on CMA? I just went off syllabus for a second. Questions on CMA. We'll spend a lot more time on this in unit 17. CMAs are comps. Yep. Yep. We refer to them as comps because we're looking at closed comps.
Just out of curiosity, you said they might add absorption rate pricing to pre-licensing.
That's just my crystal ball.
Yeah. So, but hypothetically, if they did, I assume they would add that to the continuing education as well, just to inform everybody.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Very good observation. Yep. Let me say one more thing before we take break, because we're almost done working with sellers. So last thing I have to say about working with sellers. That's not right. I got 2 more. That's okay. We'll do this and then we'll take a break. When I am listing a property that I own, I'm the owner of record and I'm the listing agent. In that situation, I can't represent the buyer. I cannot represent the buyer in that transaction. Huge conflict of interest. Because OCAR says what? OCAR says I have my client's best interest. But if I'm the owner, do I have my buyer's best interest? No. Whose best interest do I have? I have Julie's best interest. See what a huge conflict of interest that is? We can do dual. I can let somebody else in my firm represent the buyer, but I can't represent the buyer. So I could do my own open house. Buyer comes in and says, wow, this is great. I love it. I want to write it up. Great. Here's the name or number of one of my coworkers that can help you out. The exception to this rule is if I own commercial property, if I have less than a 25% interest, ownership interest in the commercial property, I can list it. So with commercial property, if I own less than a 25% interest, I can list it. As long as I explain this to the buyer, I let the buyer know that I have an ownership interest. The buyer's got to know, they got to be fully informed that I have an ownership interest in this property. Okay. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, I was so close. I got one more thing to say about, about sellers, and then we're gonna switch gears and start working with buyers. So let's take 10. We back? So let's see, take attendance real quick. And last thing I have to say about sellers, I was so close. I thought we only had one more slide, but now we have one more slide. And this is nothing new. We learned about how agency agreements terminate in Unit 7. Listing agreements are no different. So this list looks very similar to what we saw in Unit 7. So how do listing agreements end? Let's just get them all to closing. Let's get everybody to closing and get the deed signed, and then they're over, right? Well, that's ideal. They're not all going to close, but they will end when they close. Remember, all of our agency agreements have specifically listing agreements, have an expiration date. When they're over, they're over. So if our agency agreement is up on January 27th, that means at 11:59 tonight, we are finished. We can agree to extend it. But if we do not agree to extend it, our duties are over. Mutual agreement of the parties, we can mutually agree to get out. Remember, it's not my seller. Whose seller is it? Whose seller is it? It's the firm's seller. So I can't agree to get out of it, not my agreement to get out of. If my broker in charge agrees to get out, we can mutually agree. There's duties and responsibilities to each other. Either party breaks their duties or responsibilities, they're in breach. That may terminate a listing agreement. Operation of law may terminate a listing agreement if the judge takes the property for any reason. Let's say the seller loses the property to bankruptcy. It's no longer the seller's to sell. They've lost it to the bank. Destruction of property if the house burns down, and death or incapacity of either party. Keeping in mind that if the individual listing agent dies, that does not terminate the listing agreement, because the listing agreement is not between the seller and the individual agent. The broker in charge will reassign it to another agent in the firm, and the show will go on. If the firm dissolves, if the firm closes its doors, then the firm will be terminated due to death or incapacity. Again, good review of what we saw in Unit 7. Any questions? The broker can't pass off the listing to someone else? Sure, they could go to their BIC and say, I don't want to do this anymore, and the BIC can reassign it, because it's not the broker's listing. It's the BIC's listing. Well, I have to look at that, because it's to my understanding that the firm has the listing. Maybe what it's saying is the broker can't do it. The BIC can just assign it to somebody else. I'd have to look at that. Okay. The seller has certain disclosures that they have to complete. They have obligations to complete certain disclosures on the property. And one of the disclosures they have is the Residential Property Owners Association disclosure statement. Isn't that a mouthful? Here forward, I'm going to refer to this as the RPOs. This is why we make acronyms out of everything that we can in this industry, because some of these terms are so dang long. So the Residential Property Owner Association disclosure statement, hereby known as the RPOs, is a seller disclosure. The RPOs is required of most residential sellers. We'll talk about exceptions in just a second. The RPOs is a mandatory form with optional disclosure, which means the seller has to complete it. They have to complete it. They have to provide it, but they are not required to disclose. Mandatory form, optional disclosure. Most sellers of 1 to 4 residential units are required to complete this form. So a single family, a duplex, a triplex, for example, 1 to 4 residential units. The biggest exception to the RPODs is new construction. New construction does not have to complete the RPODs. Nobody's ever lived there, never before habited dwellings. So new construction is the most common reason for exemption. Everybody please understand that for sale by owner is also required to provide the RPODs. Just because you're for sale by owner isn't an out. When it comes to completing the RPODs, this is the seller's responsibility to complete. I can provide them the form. I can assist them. I can help them answer questions about how to complete it. I cannot do it for them. I've never lived in this house. I can't attest to the condition of this home. Our job is to assist the seller in completing it. But ultimately, it's the seller's responsibility. And we'll look at it in just a second. I also have a duty to keep this thing accurate throughout the listing. So if the seller discloses that something is broke, something's not working, and then they later get it fixed, if I still have it listed, we need to update the RPODs. If something's working just fine, somewhere during the listing it breaks, we need to update the RPODs. We have got to keep it updated throughout the listing. Guys, last year, 2021, remember we looked at those disciplinary actions in our e-bulletin? Last year, I saw this come up multiple times. Agents getting themselves in trouble because they failed to keep the RPODs current, accurate throughout the listing. So if something changes while you still have it listed, have your seller update it. We have a duty, no matter who you are, seller's agent, buyer's agent, doesn't matter. We have a duty to get a copy of this to the buyer. Listing agents, we're going to help the seller complete it. Both agents have a duty to get it to the buyer. Again, in the Triad MLS, the majority of the time you can find the RPODs as an attachment to that listing. Attachments are something that you don't see on Zillow, but I have access to when I look at the property. So before we ever go out and look at the property, 9.5 times out of 10, the RPODs is available for me to share with my buyer. And the time that it's not available, just call the listing agent. But the majority of the time, you're going to be able to find that information before you go see it. Failure to provide the buyer with this form gives them the right to terminate if we go under contract. They can go under contract without this form, but if they can't get it, that gives them an out. As a listing agent, let's not give our buyers an out. Let's not give them a reason to terminate. They terminate the contract, they get all their deposits back. If they don't have this thing in their hand by the end of the 3rd day following the buyer's receipt, or the end of the 3rd day following the contract date, whichever one comes first, or if they already live in the property. So maybe it's a lease to own, for example. And please understand, the buyer can't terminate because they don't like how this form is complete. The buyer's right to terminate is because they didn't get it. Mandatory form, optional disclosure. So even if the seller chooses not to disclose anything, that doesn't give the buyer an out. Everybody good with that? The only out that the buyer has is if they just don't get it. And they can choose to terminate. regardless of how the seller completes this form, I always have a duty to disclose material facts. If the seller says no representation, I still have a duty to disclose material facts. The only thing the seller is not allowed to do in completing this form is lie. And no matter how they complete the form, I always have a duty to disclose material facts. As we said, everybody, listing agent, selling agent, do what we can to get this form in the buyer's hands. And this does include working with for sale by owners. So if you're a buyer's agent, you call the FSBO, you say, my buyer's interested. Have you done this form? And they say, no, great. Let me send you an email right now. Even though I'm working with the buyer, I need to get this form in the FSBO's hands so they can complete it and provide it to my buyer. And if they say, whatever, I'm not going to do it. Okay, understand that gives your buyer the right to terminate. So the RPODs is one of the seller's disclosures. Another one of the seller disclosures is the MOG, also known as the mineral and oil and gas rights. Who remembers Unit 2? Goodness, does that seem like a long time ago? Unit 2, we talked about severing subsurface rights. The seller has to disclose whether they have or they intend to sever their subsurface rights. They have to disclose. Yeah.
Sorry, I have a quick question about the disclosure statement. In the case of the FSBO, as a seller, as a buyer, are we required to let the FSBO owner know that if they don't sign, then our buyer has the right to cancel?
I mean, you can, but it also tells them on the form too. So if you want to, if they, I would just say that, like, if they're starting to dig their heels in a little bit, like, look, you need to look at page 1. This is what could happen. Do you want to lose this buyer? So, but hopefully they're reading it, right?
Right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. With the MOG pretty much has the same rules as the RPODs. However, with the MOG, the new construction is not exempt. So on new construction properties, the MOG is required. Question comes in, where does the for sale by owner get the disclosure? The buyer's agent gets it to them. The buyer's agent says, I'm going to send you an email with these forms that I need you to complete. The MOG is a fairly new form to us, like 2015, 2016, something like that. The story I heard, this kind of gives us an idea about why we have such a form. The story I heard about how we got the MOG is a result of a lawsuit. And the lawsuit started out in Texas. And a big builder came in and bought a whole bunch of land and subdivided it and then sold, homes. The builder, before they subdivided it, they severed the subsurface rights to oil. They purchased the rights to oil in this entire development. And while they can do that, where they went wrong is they didn't disclose it. So they're building properties, they're selling homes. Some dude one day is in his backyard digging, strikes oil, says, sweet. And the builder says, that's mine. Big lawsuit happens, and now we get a form where the seller has to disclose. So let's take a pause. Let's go into Learn, Test, Pass, and let's look at our disclosures. Again, they're in the Unit 8 material and Learn, Test, Pass. And first up, we have the RPODs. It starts with instructions to property owners, informs the property owners of their rights. It tells the property owners they have choices. You can check yes, you can check no, or you can check no representation. So they have choices, yes, no, or no representation. If you check yes or no, and something happens, you must promptly give the buyer a revised. So for example, the roof didn't leak and then it starts leaking. We need to update this form. If you check no and you know there is a problem, you could be liable. So again, they have choices, yes, no, no representation. They just can't lie. If they're going to say yes or no, they need to be truthful. There's a note to buyer. This talks about their right to cancel if they don't get the form. And then on page 1, the owner signs and the buyer signs, acknowledging receipt, not saying that they're happy with it, not saying that they like it, just saying that they have received it. So the rest of the form is the disclosure. And you can see there's a whole list of things to which the seller basically has 3 choices: yes, no, or no representation. The seller has every right in the entire world to come down here and say no representation for every single thing. Mandatory form, optional disclosure. So they have to complete the form. They can choose if they say yes or no. They also have the right to say no representation. And no matter how they complete this form, I always have a duty to disclose material facts. So if they say no representation, that is in no way an out for me. So you can see it again. I'll let you guys look at this. Is there problems with the foundation, slab, fireplace, floors, windows, etc.? Is there a leak or other problem with the roof? Is there a problem with the plumbing system? What is the heating source? What is the cooling source? Septic. Is it on a septic system? If so, how many bedrooms are allowed? Damage from past infestation of wood destroying insects. Structural problems, grading problems. Da 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 da. So the seller comes down, they complete yes, no, no representation. If they say yes to anything, they have a place here to explain. If they say yes, they have a place to explain. The rest of this form is dealing with if we have a, if we're in an HOA. So it's various questions about the HOA, like who the HOA is, various disclosures about the HOA. And this is my favorite part. What do your dues cover? Is it, you know, your HOA dues? Is it trash removal? Is it street lights? Is it etc.? Obviously, if it's not an HOA, they don't need to worry about this bottom part, right? Just the top part. Because if you don't have an HOA, you have nothing to complete. Please, as a buyer's agent, once you guys get out, please don't get excited when you see no representation. Just because the seller checks no representation doesn't mean they're hiding something. That tends to be a common misconception. Oh, shady seller hiding something. It's not always what it means. Maybe they're just lazy. Maybe they don't want to complete it. Maybe they don't know. Let's say, for example, heaven forbid, something were to happen to my parents and now I'm selling their house. I haven't lived in their house in over 20 years. I don't know the condition of their home. I don't know what's going on in their home. I haven't lived there. What if you've had a tenant in there for the last 10 years? The tenant knows your home better than you do, right? Because they've been the ones living in it. So don't get excited because, and don't, more importantly, don't let your buyers get excited because they say no representation. Explain to the buyers, your buyers, no matter how the sellers complete this form, the buyer should always be encouraged to investigate and inspect and learn about the property on their own. I don't care how the seller completes this form. The buyer should always be encouraged to investigate and inspect. We're going to talk about that in Unit 10. We'll talk about that more in Unit 21. Some sellers I really appreciate their honesty. I saw one of these one time. My buyers wanted to see a property, and I pulled this up in MLS, and I don't remember which one it was, but one address is like mold and mildew, and they said yes. And then under yes, they said, warning, black toxic mold, must wear mask, enter with caution. And I shared that with my buyers and they said, yeah, we don't want to see that property. And I said, oh, thank God. But I was really appreciative of the sellers for warning us. You know, it takes, there's a buyer out there for you, I promise. The property was priced with that in mind. But I can't tell you how much we appreciated the sellers telling us about that. Big deal? I think so. What do you mean, doesn't that stay on your listing? They got rid of the black toxic mold, we update the form, right? Actually, it was a house in Old Salem, so close to Ardmore. It later sold. You just need the right buyer, right? If the price is right,
That's
the
just
price
some,
is right. Any buyer's willing to deal with black toxic mold, the resources, money, right? Yeah, me.
that was just something that floored me when an agent told us that. It was,
Ardmore basement.
that was her excuse for a mold infested bronchitis factory. Yeah.
I think you said it right on. That was her excuse. Okay. Questions on the RPODs? Can you guys look it over? The other one we have is the MOG. Seller disclosure. Again, it starts with instructions to property owners, talks about the disclosure. This one is best seen if we can cut it in half. So let's divvy this thing in two. The top half addresses minerals. So there's 3 disclosures that the seller makes about minerals. Mineral rights were severed from the previous owner, to which the seller can say yes, no, or no representation. Seller has severed the mineral rights, or seller intends to sever the mineral rights. They cannot say no representation there. If they have severed the rights, or if they intend to sever them before they sell, then they need to disclose that. And then we go through that same little exercise with oil and gas. So yes, no, or no representation about the previous owner. Yes or no only about themselves. Note to purchaser, and then a place for everybody to sign. This is one of the few one-page forms we have left. I wonder how much longer it's going to stay one page. It's one update away from being a 2-page form. We like forms and paperwork in this industry. Questions on the MOG, questions on the disclosures. There's another form that we talked about that in part is a seller disclosure. Who remembers the other form we talked about? In part is a seller disclosure, requires them to disclose if they know. They can only disclose what they know. Remember the other one we talked about? No? There we go. We're getting closer. You got a hint. Yeah, there we go. The lead-based paint in part is another seller disclosure required if the property was built prior to 1978. And the seller must disclose what they know, if they know. They can't disclose what they don't know. Okay. So the 2 disclosures are filled when closing. No. These disclosures are provided when we present the offer. So we grab them from MLS. I have my buyer sign them. And then when I present the offer, these are included with our offer. Yep. We're hashing this out well before we get to closing. If they're not in MLS, when you're ready to present the offer, just call the listing agent. Yeah, I'm sending you an offer, but I really need the RPOs and the MOG. And if you never get them, tell your buyer they have the right to terminate. They have the right to get out, should they choose. Any questions at all on sellers? We're getting ready to start working with buyers next. Working with buyers. What's one of the very first things I'm going to do when I meet a buyer? Very first thing I'm going to do when I meet a buyer. Yep. Buyer calls you and says, I want to buy a house. Can you help me? I say, you betcha. Start working with real estate agent disclosure. Maybe the buyer that comes into your open house turns into a customer or client. Maybe you never see him again. Buyer calls you and says, or emails you or whatever and says, could you help me buy a house? And you set up a buyer consultation. You set up a time for the buyer to come into your office and sit down and talk to you about buying a house. As soon as their butts hit the chair, the first thing you need to do is you're working with a real estate agent. Because this hour buyer consultation is going to ask questions. We're going to get information about the buyer. So very, very early, we're doing our working with real estate agent. And the real estate commission says, once we provide the disclosure, at that time, we need to decide in what capacity we're going to work. Are you going to be my client? Or are you going to be my customer? I need to know our relationship so I know how to proceed. If you're my client, I owe you OCAR. I'm going to put you in first class. If you're my customer, I owe you honesty, fairness, disclosure, material fact, back in coach. Don't have to have them sign a buyer's agency agreement. Remember, we can do oral buyer agency. But we need to decide early on so I know how to treat you. If we're proceeding with me as a seller subagent, if we're proceeding with my buyers, the buyers, my customer, then we're going to make sure that we check the unrepresented buyer on the disclosure. And before I can show a buyer this listing or that listing, I need to make sure that the seller of this listing or that listing will allow my buyer customer. Remember, the sellers have choices. The firm can provide choices. We're either working with buyer's agents only or seller subagents. So if your buyer customer says, I want to see 123 Main Street, and you go in MLS and you look up 123 Main Street and it says buyer's agent only, you cannot show the buyer customer 123 Main Street. The seller has said no customers, clients only. Each property is different. And guys, like we said the other day, think about it, most buyers out there are going to want to be represented, right? I don't know many, if we do our job and explain it right, I don't know many people that are going to say, nah, I can buy a house without representation. Thank you for asking, right? If we get our little spiel down, why would they not want to be represented? Why would they not? Christina, that's correct. Assuming they're not buying it for sale by owner, that won't pay me, right? As long as we're in MLS, I'm guaranteed commission from the seller. So truth be told, I don't know many buyers, but we got to give them their options. Don't look at a buyer and say, all right, you're going to hire me and I'm going to represent you, sign here. We got to give them their options. We got to let them know they have choices. So what if you meet this buyer and they say, whatever, I don't want representation. I can buy a house without being represented. Fine. And then somewhere later down the road, they decide they want to switch from being an unrepresented buyer to a represented buyer. They want to go from being a customer to a client. You need to be very, very careful if you allow this switch. If we're allowing this switch, before we can make it happen, I have to disclose to the seller what I know about them. Making the switch can harm the seller. Because when I make that switch, the buyer becomes from my customer to my client. Once that buyer becomes my client, I have to share anything confidential about the seller that I know with them. So if I know anything, I got to remind them what I know, and I got to get their permission. Am I going to take their verbal permission, or am I going to follow up with a documentation? Am I going to require an email or a text or something? Because of the nature, because of how this can negatively impact the seller, is strongly discouraged. Guys, bottom line, I truly think if we're doing our job right and we're explaining this to the buyer up front, they're going to want to be represented. We have the option to have the buyer enter into a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. And a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement, how many firms can the buyer date? As many as they want to, right? It's in non-exclusive. So the buyer can work with as many firms as they wish. Who's going to get paid? The one that finds on the property. Don't find on the property, you don't get paid.
Julie, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm just following on under this the paragraph working as a seller sub agent. When you have a buyer that chooses to not be a client, how does that automatically make it a relationship with the seller? Like, there are no instances that the broker walks away from the listing completely. It automatically makes it a trusting relationship with the seller.
Because I'm a sub agent, because I'm a seller sub agent. So if the buyer doesn't hire me, I got to have a role in this transaction. So if the buyer doesn't hire me, then my only other option is to be a seller sub agent if they allow it.
Okay. Because you have to have.
And one reason they may not allow it is that vicarious liability that we talked about, because then they could be responsible for my actions.
So in no instances does the broker completely walk away from both parties?
Oh, you can, sure. Like, look, if you don't want to hire me, then I'm not going to help you. Right? You could choose not to be a seller sub agent. But keep in mind, there's only two capacities I can work with a buyer. I'm either a buyer's agent or a seller sub agent. Either you're my client or you're my customer. And if we don't do either one of those, I have client customers, my only options.
So it's at your discretion whether you still want to stay in the mix.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. And that's a great point, Essence. If that buyer says, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to. Have a nice day. Good luck to you, right? You may want to decide up front that it's not worth your time and energy to deal with, certain people.
Okay. Gotcha.
Sometimes we have clashing personalities, right? I wish I could tell you we always all get along, but you may decide up front that you guys don't mesh well. And then if they're digging their heels in and going, I don't want to be represented and I don't want to be unrepresented, you know what? This is more trouble than what it's worth. Have a nice day.
I have a question too.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm having a hard time understanding this, but so if your buyer doesn't want to be represented, you become the seller sub agent to whatever seller that you find for that buyer.
That property.
You'll find
if they allow it.
You still find them a house and then you become the sub agent to that seller.
To the seller.
You want to make an offer or whatever.
If they allow it. Yep.
If the seller allows it.
And the firm. Yep.
Okay.
So Julie, I think that kind of answered your question as well. We stayed on after class on Tuesday. Somebody had a good question on sub-agency, so I hit record again. So it was about 8 extra minutes or something. I put that in our YouTube channel. So you guys may want to watch that. I don't know, for those of you that stayed on, I don't know if it helped or not, but I made it available to everybody. So you may just want to make a note to our YouTube channel. Guys, I get it. Sub-agency is tricky. Please review it. Please just keep going back over and over and over and again till your little light bulb comes on.
Julie, quick
Remember
question.
yeah.
About I understand why as an agent, you don't want the non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. But what if you cross paths with a FSBO that looked really good? Maybe that would be like your best option. Like, hey, keep me in mind. You can still sell it however you want.
Sure.
But this way, if I bring you someone, then I do get a commission.
Oh, no, not with the FSBO, because this is a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. The FSBO is
okay.
represented. The FSBO is unrepresented, right? The FSBO is saying, I don't want to work with an agent. That's why I'm going it alone. That's why I'm going for sale by owner.
Okay, so but I guess for a FSBO, would you try to get them to do the one where whoever brings them the buyer first gets paid?
Ask me that a different way.
The agreement where they're not committed to any one seller. They're not committed
just-
to,
That protection agreement,
yes.
that's just protecting my commission. If this buyer closes, you owe me money.
Okay, all right, thanks.
It's not agency. It's not agency. It's just an agreement that, yep, I'll pay you.
Okay, thank you.
The other day, we mentioned oral buyer agency. We see it again here now that we're talking about buyers. Remember, the Real Estate Commission does allow us to work under an oral buyer agency agreement. Please, please, please hear me when I say an oral buyer agency agreement is an agency agreement. It's an express agreement, which means it's been clearly stated. And in this case, it's clearly been stated in words, orally. We do our working with real estate agents. We enter an oral buyer agency agreement. I explain what buyer agency means. I owe that buyer OCAR. The latest I have to put my agency agreement in writing is when I'm ready to present an offer on their behalf. I cannot present an offer on behalf of a client under an oral agreement. If I'm presenting an offer for a buyer client, that relationship has to be in writing. You can get it in writing as early as you want to. The latest you have to get it in writing is when you're ready to present their offer. Remember, with oral buyer agency, we talked about a couple different caveats. Oral buyer agency cannot be exclusive. That's worth me repeating. Oral buyer agency cannot be exclusive. I can't tell the buyer, you only see me, you only talk to me. Don't you talk to any other agents. I cannot demand exclusivity under an oral agreement. The other caveat with oral buyer agency is we can't have a specific period of time that we're going to work together. Under an oral agreement, I can't say you're going to work with me for 2 months. If I want to put a time limit on us, I got to put it in writing. If I want to demand exclusivity, I got to put it in writing. So let's talk about the one that is in writing. And the one that is in writing is exclusive buyer agency agreement. When you see the word exclusive, you know it's in writing. Yes? I wish I had more head nods when I said that. When you see the word exclusive, you know it's in writing, right? Because oral cannot be exclusive. So an exclusive buyer agency agreement, there's one firm, the buyer is only allowed to date one firm. And that firm gets paid when they find and purchase a home. Buyer's agency agreements don't have as many reasons to terminate as the listing agreement. So either it's going to close or it's going to expire. You're BIC, and they may agree to get out of it. You might be able to get out of mutual agreement. But typically with buyer's agency agreements, they're either going to expire or they're going to close. So over on page 239, we got a whole laundry list of things that are the buyer's agent's responsibilities. So let's assume you've done your working with real estate agents and you decided in what capacity you're going to work. And let's decide that that capacity you're going to work is as a buyer's agent. So we've done our disclosure. We're all in agreement to be a buyer's agent. Maybe it's oral, maybe it's in writing. Once we get past that, the very next question that should fall out of your mouth to that buyer is, have you talked to a lender? Before I can start showing them properties, before we can start talking about properties, I need to know that they can afford them. If they say no, I've not talked to a lender yet, I didn't know what to do, I didn't know where to start, great. Here's a list of 2 or 3 lenders that I've used in the past or someone in my firm has used that I suggest, that I recommend you calling. Always encourage your buyers to shop around, shop lenders. All lenders offer a different product. There is no across the board lending package. So one of the things we can do to protect our buyer is highly recommend that they talk to a couple of different lenders so they can choose which product is best for them. You're just getting started. I get it. You may or may not know a lender. You will. You'll form those relationships. As you're just getting started, your firm will probably provide you with a preferred vendor list. Here's lenders that other agents in my office have used successfully. Do not send your buyers to Google to find a lender. They can do that. Provide them with a list. I say 2, at least 2. I prefer 3. Let them shop around. So I give them the name of 3 lenders and they say, no, I don't like any of those. Do they have to use anybody I recommend? No, it's their lender. They can use whoever they want to. I'm just, when they say, well, my cousin's a lender, I'm just going to call them. Great. What can it hurt them to talk to somebody else? I know it's their cousin, but how do they know that's the best deal for them? So the best thing we can do is encourage them to talk to at least 2 lenders. Again, units 14 and 15 are our financing unit. So we get to put on our lender's hat in those units. Did y'all know you got to act like a lender in this class? So we're going to put on our lender hat, pretend to be lenders in those units. So we'll learn more about that. There's a common misconception out there that what I pay for rent equates to my mortgage payment. And that is the farthest thing from the truth. So that's why we need to know before I start spending my time and my energy and my mileage and my gas, driving them around, showing them property, that they can afford it. So working with real estate agent, deciding what capacity we're going to do, boom, number 3, have you talked to a lender? Once we get that squared away, then we start asking the buyer questions. What kind of home are you looking for? Where are you looking? What do you want? Is there something in particular? I have my buyers take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. Wants on the left, needs on the right. What are your wants and your needs? What are must-haves? What are things you have to have? Help your buyers see. Like, this is why we ask questions. Buyers, especially first-time home buyers, may not know the inventory. They may not know what they want. They may not know what they're looking for. Let's say, for example, I have a couple and they have 2 kids. So I got 3 bedrooms, right? Couples in one room and each kid gets their room. So I got 3 bedrooms. So I'm meeting with this family and they say, we need a 4-bedroom house. And I start doing the math. There's 1 room and 2 kids, that's 3 rooms. May I ask why we have to have a 4-bedroom house? Well, since the pandemic, I've been working from home and I need an office. Fantastic. Maybe I'm not looking for a 4-bedroom. Maybe we need a 3-bedroom with a bonus or a 3-bedroom with an office, right? Maybe we have other possibilities. We can expand their search by asking a couple questions and helping them think through it. Be prepared for buyers' minds to change. They may know what they want until they get out there and start looking at property. They may tell you, I have to have this and this, until they see a few. Maybe I don't need this and this as much as I thought I did. So just be prepared for their minds to change. I had buyers once. She said, I do not want a front loading garage. What's a front loading garage? The garage door is in the front of the house. So when you're looking to stand at the street, looking at the house, you see the garage door. She said, I do not want a front loading garage. I said, fair enough. So if the homes had garages, they were side loading, which means you had to drive around, right? It wasn't facing the road. I got a phone call from her one day. There's a new listing. Can we go see it? Pulled it up in MLS and guess what it was? It was a front loading garage. And I called her back and I said, are you sure? And she said, I know, but dang it, that house is cute. Y'all want to know what she ended up buying? She bought a house with a front loading garage. So just because they say absolutely not doesn't always mean. We need to be flexible. We need to help them figure out. We need to help them figure out what it is that they're looking for. Once we decide on properties, once we decide on what they're looking for, then we're going to schedule showings. Now here in the Triad, we use a program called Showing Time, and it's a centralized showing system, which means I can schedule all my showings in one place from multiple firms. So I can schedule my showings. We get approval from the sellers. I'm with my buyers. We're going to go around, look at properties. For a buyer's agent, the real work for us begins when the buyer says, this is the one, let's write it up. Up until this time, I've just been driving around looking at pretty houses. Isn't that what the public think that's what we do all day, every day anyway? We just go around looking at pretty houses, right? Yeah, until the buyer says, and guys, by the way, they're not all pretty, but until the buyer says, let's write it up. As a buyer's agent, that's when my work begins. That's what we're going to talk about when we come back from break. So let's take 10 and we'll pick up here. Nope, I stopped sharing. When the buyer says, ooh, this is the one, let's write it up. Okay. So camera's on. Welcome back. Two quick things before we, is Essence, where's Essence? There she is. Hey, the question you asked earlier about if you want to choose to work with them or not, you know, if I could just follow up with that, I had a thought. You as an independent contractor, you may at some point decide you're only going to work with buyer clients, right? That's your choice. You can say, if you don't hire me, I'm not going to work with you. That's your choice. So if they say, no, I don't want to be represented, nice meeting you, have a nice day, and send them on their way. So what reminded me, guys, remember, it's so important that we remember your test is not on what you're going to do. Your test is on what you can do. So you have every right to make that choice to work with clients only, to never be a seller subagent. But your test may ask you about being seller subagent. Is that a good follow-up? Does that help a little bit more? Yeah, okay, good. Let's go back to page 223 real quick too. 223. We were talking about terminating. The question came up about transferring the listing to another broker. The individual broker can't transfer the listing. That's what that's saying. The broker in charge can't. The broker in charge can transfer it to somebody else in the firm because it's my listing, right? So the individual, and I'm just picking on you, say, Christina, you are not doing a good job with my buyer. I'm going to transfer it to somebody else in my firm. You could come to me and say, Julie, this buyer and I aren't meshing. I'm not having a good time. And I may say, let me try to salvage this, get you a referral fee, but let me try to salvage this and find somebody else in the firm that can. Like I said, guys, we don't get along with everybody. Sometimes if we just don't mesh well, the BIC may try to find somebody else that does help them mesh. So what it's saying is that you can't transfer the listing. I can. Okay. So let's go back. And we're working with buyers. We have found the one. The buyer said, let's do it. Let's write this up. By the way, the one may be the first listing, the first property they see, which is highly unlikely. It might be the fifth one. You might be with them for 5 days. You might be with them for 5 weeks. You might be with them for 5 months. There is no guarantee on how long. This is not HGTV. All right, we're going to look at 3 properties and you're going to decide which one. No, that does not happen. So however long it takes, we find the one. That's when our job starts, because what we're going to do, start obtaining the information, start gathering the information. What are the things that you did to get ready for the listing? Didn't you get HOA documents? Didn't you check zoning? Didn't you go to, DOT, right? Schools. I mean, all that information you're getting, we're now helping the buyer gather that information. I'm helping the buyer fill in the blanks of the offer to purchase and contract. How much do you want to offer, for example? When your buyer looks at you and asks you, how much should I offer? Are you just going to blurt a number out? Are you just going to tell them they should offer asking price? I'm going to do a CMA for my buyer as well, aren't I? I'm going to look at some closed comps. I'm going to get a reasonable response from my buyer to help them know where to start with their offer. We're going to discuss the terms of the offer. Once we have the offer complete, once it's finished and signed by my buyer, then I'm going to present it on behalf of my buyer. Maybe some counter offers, maybe some negotiations. We're getting into that in units 9 and 10. Eventually, we'll get the thing under contract. And then as buyer's agents, we're going to assist our buyers with their inspections and their investigations. Caveat emptor says the onus is on the buyer to learn as much about the property as they possibly can. As their agent, I'm there to help them. I'm there to help them learn. I'm there to help them encourage them to learn as much about the property as they possibly can. Again, we'll talk about the contract to closing process, mostly in unit 21. We'll touch on it in unit 10. I'm going to be with my buyer through closing. I'm there with them through the whole transaction, the entire transaction. I'm going to be with them at the closing table. I'm going to go to the attorney's office with them. I'm going to be there when they sign. Has anybody ever bought a house? It's scary. Can we agree with that? It's scary. You're like signing a 30-year commitment if you're getting a loan, right? If you're going through a lender. I mean, that's a heck of a commitment. So I'm going to be there, the pleasing face for my buyers, the face that they recognize, the person that's been by their side this entire transaction. I'm going to be there to help them get through this transaction. Question came in about earnest money. We start talking about earnest money in unit 10. We're getting there. Any questions on the buyer's agent's responsibilities? Again, you got a really nice list on 239. Obviously, this isn't inclusive, but it's a good place to start. As a buyer's agent, easy. As a buyer's agent, I might be working with for sale by owners. I might be working with unrepresented sellers. My loyalty is to the one that hires me, not to the one that pays me. So if the for sale by owner agrees to pay me and the buyer hires me, my loyalty is to the buyer. I don't know the seller anything. They didn't hire me. Well, that's not true. I owe them honesty and fairness and the disclosure of material facts. I don't know that seller old car, even though they're the one paying me. My loyalty is to the buyer. We talked about limited listing services. Some limited listing services may not offer what your firm considers full commission. It's a completely negotiable agreement between the seller and the firm, right? I had a buyer interested in a limited listing service, and I looked in MLS to see that their commission they were offering me was 0.5%. They were offering me 0.5% to bring the buyer. I'm a little naive. I know this about myself. You tell me the sky's red, I'm going to look outside, right? I called the listing agent and I said, I'm sorry, I think I found a mistake in your MLS. She said, nope, that's the commission that my seller is willing to pay you. And I said, got it, thank you. What do you think the very next call I made was? Who did I call next? After I felt kind of dumb for making that call. Who did I call next? There's two parties to the transaction. If the seller won't pay me, yeah. So I called my buyer. I said, we got our appointment scheduled for 2 o'clock today. The commission that the firm is willing to pay me is not going to cut it. If we move forward with this property, you will have to pay the difference. That's what our buyer's agency agreement says. Our buyer's agency agreement tells our buyers, I will always ask the seller to pay me first. But if they can't or won't, the buyer has to. There's only 2 people available to pay me. And if the seller won't do it, the last one up is the buyer. And if I have a written buyer's agency agreement, they've already agreed to pay me. They already agree that I should be paid. Everybody with me? Also with limited service listing services, keep in mind, you may not be dealing with the firm. You may not be dealing with the listing agent. You might be dealing directly with the seller. And in that case, again, you need to remember who gets old car. You need to remember who your loyalty is. That seller is somebody else's client. So if that's who you're communicating with, you need to keep in mind that you're acting within your buyer's best interest. Questions on this so far?
I do have a question, not off of this statement that you just made, but when you said that there are only two people and one has to pay with you, has there ever been an instance, like, for instance, the 0.5%? What if your buyer wasn't willing to go a percent that you were comfortable with? What do you do in that instant, being that you're supposed to technically look out for buyer's interests first?
In that case, I don't have to show you that property. They have an agreement with me saying that they agree to pay me. So as long as it's in writing, they've already agreed to that. And if they say, no, I'm not going to pay you, then I'm going to say, well, then if you're not going to do your part, then I'm not going to do mine. So if you're not going to pay me, if you're telling me you're not, then I'm not going to show you this house. We have an agreement that says I'll help you find property, but that agreement also says I deserve to be paid. So it's a two-way street. And remember, I can only do that on a written buyer agency. You know, I can't do that. They don't owe me nothing on oral, right? So yeah, and of course and guys, I had this conversation with my buyers before we ever pulled in the driveway. Don't let them walk in the front door and fall in love, right? Because now they're not hearing you. You're babbling on about commission and they're just thinking about living here and moving into their new home, right? So we had this conversation because if they would have said no, what's the point of going?
So is your percentage actually listed out, the exact percentage being that you're expected to get it from the seller?
In the buyer's agency agreement?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. They agree that if I sell you a house, I deserve to get paid X amount. Yep. 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 Other questions? Guys, that's what our agency, remember, agency agreements are employment contracts. And part of what they're doing, they're employing us to do a job, but they're also making sure we get paid. We're also protecting our commission. And if the buyer who's contractually obligated to pay you says no, I mean, it's a two-way street. You don't want to pay me, I don't want to show you this house. Moving on, right? Luckily, my buyers were like, oh yeah, sure, not a problem. Showed the house, it went for them. We went on. With those sellers offering 0.5%, I wasn't too disappointed. Okay. So now we're going to take a few minutes. We've looked at our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. So now we're going to take a few minutes and look at our exclusive buyer agency agreement. The provisions about the buyer's agency agreement that differ from the listing agreement. A lot of the provisions are the same, but the ones that differ, something different we see in the buyer agency agreement, are on pages 240 and 241. And what we're going to do now is get out of our PowerPoint. We're going to go into Learn, Test, Pass. Real quick, let me point out, I just put this in here for you guys to look at if you wish. But I do have the non-exclusive buyer agency agreement if you want to look that over. But what we're looking at, the star of this section, is our exclusive buyer agency agreement. Again, the highlights, what the book said, what the commission says you need is highlighted on here for you. I don't think it hurts you to look at the whole thing, but specifically the highlights. Our exclusive buyer agency agreement is entered in between the buyer and who? The buyer and the firm. So we have an agreement between the buyer and the firm. Again, a lot of these provisions are going to look the same. Just flip seller to buyer, right? We're talking to somebody different now. Buyer has to represent that they're not a party to an agreement with another firm. They're representing that they have received the working with real estate agents. Type of property. This is something different that we see in the buyer's agency agreement that we don't see in the listing agreement. We're looking for general here. We're not looking for specifics. What kind of property is this buyer wanting to buy? They want residential, they want commercial. And then we're looking for a general location. This could be a subdivision, it could be a city, it could be a county, it could be the triad. Again, you're not committing yourself to a location, but each buyer has different needs. So that's why it says general location. Remember the other day we were talking about the buyer that we had an oral buyer agency agreement and now we're ready to present an offer, and the buyer is reluctant to sign the written buyer agency agreement, one option we may have before I can present their offer is to do a buyer agency agreement just for that one property. If I were to do a buyer, if they're reluctant to sign, we can agree to enter into a buyer agency agreement only for 123 Main Street. If you get to purchase it, I represent you. If you don't, hopefully we can still keep working together. Obviously, I've not done something to completely build your trust. So if this doesn't work out, hopefully we can still work together and I can continue to work on proving myself before we find the next property. So just so you know, we have these options. We can be specific as the address to North Carolina. I wouldn't go that big, but you guys are with me, right? General location of where they want to buy. The effect of the agreement, again, we have an end date, we have a term. It looks a little different on the buyer because we might work with different buyers. We might work with a buyer who intends to purchase a single property, or we might work with a buyer who purchases more than one. So let's say an investor calls you and says, I will need to add 10 homes to my portfolio this year. Can you help me? And of course, your answer is, yeah. So now you may have this going to purchase more than one. Either way, we need an expiration date, and 11/59 on that date, it's over. Compensation, we're going to address compensation. The other day, we talked about the retainer fee. So if your firm allows you, if you plan to collect a retainer fee, this is where we spell that out. Buyer's going to agree that we get paid X amount. Our commission is spelled out. And here it is. Firm shall seek fee from cooperating listing firm or from the seller. Buyer agrees that firm shall be entitled to receive on the same consideration. If the buyer purchases a property where compensation is less than the fee, or where no compensation is offered, buyer and firm agree that buyer will pay the difference of the fee and the compensation. So our buyer's agency agreement says, I deserve to get X amount when you buy a house. I'm going to go to the seller first. Buyer, that's my promise to you. I will always go to the seller first. But if they're not going to do it, you have to. So it spells it out for us. Questions on that? This tends to be a source of confusion. So let me make sure we're good with that verbiage. I want to make sure y'all get paid. We work hard. I'm not a volunteer agent. I'm trying to put food on my table and keep my power bill on. So let's get paid. My power on by paying the bill. Y'all know what I meant. Okay. As with our listing agreement, we talk about when we've earned our compensation. Remember, we actually earn our commission when we bring the parties together. I don't get paid until it closes. But we discuss when I've earned my commission, we're going to discuss when I actually get paid. Our agency agreements are a two-way street. Firm owes duties to the buyer, buyer owes duties to the firm. So the firm's duty, seek a property at a price and terms acceptable to the buyer, present all written offers or counter offers, disclose all material facts, account for all their money. These are the duties that I owe my buyers. Spells out the responsibilities I have to them, the duties that I have to them. Here's our non-discrimination clause. We saw this very same thing in the listing agreement. We'll talk about federal fair housing when we get to unit 19. Buyer love letters. We saw this in the listing agreement. I said we talk about it here. Love letters got really big in this world that we're in right now, this multiple offer world. NAR, National Association of Realtors, is having a hard time with love letters. A lot of these love letters are starting to touch on are touching on fair housing issues. So the buyer's writing a letter to the seller telling him why in a multiple offer situation you should select my offer. And a lot of times in that letter, they're saying stuff like, I can imagine my family sitting around the Christmas tree at this home. And that one sentence hit on two fair housing protected classes. We talked about family, we talked about familial status, and we talked about religion. So the big concern about these love letters are violations of fair housing. NAR has not come out and said, don't do it. NAR has said, please, if you must, proceed with caution. Bottom line, I think the seller should only care about how much are you willing to pay for my house. I don't think the love letters are nice, but at the end of the day, the seller should care about how much. Just, you guys make sure you read this, and when you get in the industry, maybe these are on their way out. You won't have to deal much with these. But what I'm starting to see of a lot of listings in the MLS, I have a section for agent only remarks. So there's information that you guys don't see that we can only share. And what I'm starting to see in agent only is buyers' love letters won't be presented. So we're strongly discouraged, not illegal yet. Two-way street, buyer has duties to the firm. The buyer agrees to work exclusively with the firm. They're going to refer the firm any information about any property they want to see. They're going to let me call the for sale by owner. They're not going to go out to them directly. They're going to let me contact anybody. They need to be available for reasonable periods of time to examine properties. You want me to help you buy a house? You need to be available to let me show you a house, right? I can't help you buy a house if I can't let you see it. Once we go under contract, due diligence, we'll talk about due diligence in Unit 10, all negotiations, communications. Other professional advice, again, is something that we don't see in the listing agreement that we see here. Buyers need lots of people to help them get to closing. Buyers are going to look at you and say, who should do my home inspection? Who should I call for a lender? Who should do my pest inspection? Who should do my survey? These are duties that I need to help with my buyer. Again, you guys, always give them options. Always say, here are the name of 2 or 3 home inspectors that I've used in the past, or someone in my firm has used. Never, ever, ever look at a buyer and say, this is the closing attorney we're using, this is the home inspector we're using, this is the lender we're using, period, end of story. It's the buyer's services. The buyers have a choice of who they want to use. Again, I tell you, don't go to Google. They can do that. Provide them a service based on your experience or the experience from other agents in your firm. Most firms have a preferred vendor list. Once you get in the industry, you'll start meeting these people. You'll start meeting lenders and closing attorneys, and you'll form your own relationships. They're starting to come back out and bring us food again. COVID took away donuts, but dang it, they're starting to come back. Home inspector will stop by with a box of donuts or a bag of candy or something, you know? So they're coming by their office and introducing themselves to you in the hopes that you'll suggest that your buyer calls them. If y'all like donuts, you're going in the right industry. I'm just going to tell you that. Buyer acknowledges, again, we got receipt of the sample offer to purchase and contract. There's a nice Q&A on home inspections. Confidentiality of offers. I cannot disclose the terms of my buyer's offer to anyone else. The terms of those offer are the business of my buyer. This also holds true to the listing agent. The listing agent cannot disclose the terms of one offerer, one person, one buyer, I need to say. They cannot disclose the terms of one offer to another buyer without their permission. So if we're in a multiple offer situation, you got 3 offers in your hand, and buyer number 4 calls you and says, what did everybody else offer? You can't share that until you have these guys' permission. Let's be honest. Are these guys going to give you permission to share terms of their offer? Probably not. So confidentiality of offer, we owe that to our buyers, listing and buyers agents. Here is dual agency as explained to the buyer. We explained dual agency to the seller. Now we're going to explain to the buyer how dual agency works again. I think this is helpful for you guys to look this over, both of your agency agreements. As with before, either the buyer authorizes the firm to act as a dual agent or they do not authorize the firm. They choose one or the other. If they say yes to dual, then we can ask them if they want designated. So, dual and designated agency. Unit 7, license law and rule comments in Appendix A in the back of your book. Both agency agreements. The Q&A working with real estate agent brochure. There's several different places, several different resources you guys have to expose yourself to dual agency. The more you can get it to wrap your brain around, better we're going to be. Again, mediation. Surveillance. Again, we're letting the buyer know that the seller can have video. They should not have audio. Again, with that being said, I still just caution my buyers, just in case. I wish I could trust every seller out there, but I can't. And all I'm worried about with my buyers hurting their negotiating power. If the seller hears them say they love this house, the seller just got dollar signs in their eyes and they're going to counter, right? Because they heard the buyer say, I love this home. So just make sure they understand, well, they shouldn't have surveillance. Photographs and video. The buyer has the right to take pictures, to take video of the property, unless the seller tells them otherwise. Make sure when you're with your buyer that they're only taking pictures and video of the property. Make sure they're not honing in on, zooming in on the stuff, right? Make sure they're not scoping the place out. Couple reasons why buyers may want to take pictures. Let's say you're supposed to meet buyers after work today to show them a property, and one of them gets hung up at work and can't meet you. Their spouse may want to go through the home and snap a few pictures so they can share it when they get home to see if they're interested. Another, and I think probably the more common, guys, I'm here to tell you, if you have a day full of showings, let's say you're going to go out on Saturday and show 12 properties. I promise you, after a while, those 12 properties are going to run together. And by the end of the day, you're going to be trying to figure out which kitchen was in which house. So you may want to encourage your buyers to take notes. They can either do so with a notepad or they can whip out their phones. Again, you guys, when we, buyers and buyers agents, are in a seller's home, we need to respect that it's still the seller's home. Okay, the seller still lives there. If the seller wants you to remove your shoes, you remove your shoes. We need to be with our buyers. Don't just open the front door and let them run amok throughout the home. Seller very well may have cameras and see what your buyers are doing in this room or that room and this room, and they're going to be upset. We have some closed Facebook groups, real estate agent Facebook groups, and there was an agent not too terribly long ago that said her sellers had a showing and their sellers watched on their camera, watched the kids jump up and down on all the beds. The kids went from bedroom to bedroom, jumping up and down on all the beds. And they had all this on camera. And agent and parents were standing there aware of it, but they were just chit-chatting. And before they left, they went and straightened the sheets out, you know, so they didn't get caught, so they didn't get in trouble. And the seller sat and watched this whole thing. Did we have a ticked off seller? You bet. Is that lack of respect for their home? You bet. Guys, it is 2022. Pretend like you're on camera, especially when you're in somebody's home, because you know what? There's a really good chance that you are. Respect the stuff. Your buyers need to be encouraged to look at the space. They need to look in closets. They need to look in kitchen cabinets, things that are going to stay. They don't need to look in dresser drawers. They don't need to look in desk drawers. You guys with me? And I know a lot of times buyers are shy and they may be uncomfortable opening kitchen cabinets. So help them. They're buying this house thinking about it. Don't they have a right to know what the closet looks like? So help them. Like, look, here are your kitchen cabinets. These are what it looks like. Somebody says use common sense. Whew. We don't all have common sense, do we? I'll tell you guys, when COVID hit, when the pandemic hit, one thing that happened that I liked, that I really wish would have stayed, showings during the pandemic, sellers were leaving cabinet doors and closet doors open because they didn't want buyers coming in and touching their stuff, right? So you'd walk in and all the kitchen cabinets would be open, the bathroom cabinets, the closet doors. I said, dang, I like that. Pandemic's over and that's gone away. I wish that was something that would have stayed. But just, you know, I had a girlfriend buy a house a couple years ago and we were in the kitchen and I opened the cap. She was like, Julie. I was like, it's cool, man. I got it. I'm a real estate agent. I know what I'm doing, you know? So they're just reluctant. They think they're like trespassing. There's a difference in kitchen cabinets and dresser drawers though. So just make sure they're looking at the space that they want to purchase. And again, you know, make sure they're not scoping the place out. If they're going around trying to take pictures of documents laying on the desk, for example, we may need to have a conversation with the buyers. Am I not giving my buyers property information in paper form? Sure. And they have online. But it looks different on a piece of paper than what it does in person. Should you let them roam and then walk them through the house? I am with my buyers. I am always with my buyers. I hate to say I don't trust them, but I had buyers a couple years ago. I only saw the couple until we went under contract. And then we went under contract. These guys had like 6 kids. So we went under contract and they wanted to show it to the kids. And then mom and dad wanted to come too. So now that we're under contract, we have 10 people that want to see the house. I divided that group in half. I said, half of you come with me, the other half hang out on the front yard, right? So we kind of divvied that up so I could make sure I could be with them all. I can't open the door and say, all right, guys, have at, and let 6 kids just, you know, through the house. It's not their house yet. We still need to respect the seller's house. Feels like I'm invading if I'm always following them. I mean, I guess if you trust your buyers to go through the home and you want to hang out on the front porch, that's entirely up to you. But remember, you're responsible for your buyers when they are in somebody's house. So I'll leave you with that. That's right. Take it like a tour. I'm letting them go through the house. I'm not walking in the bedroom going, and here's the primary bedroom. They can't imagine themselves in that bedroom if I'm standing in the middle of it, right? So I let them go in the bedroom, let them have the experience of walking into the room first. That's right. Somebody said there's enough liability on this job without having to worry about the buyers messing something up. There was a disciplinary action a couple months ago, maybe this past summer. The buyer's agent got there first, got there a little early, went inside, turned the lights on, you know, got the home ready. Nothing unusual. If you can, great. If not, it's okay too. In the process of opening the home and getting it ready for her buyers, before her buyers got there, she decided to stop by bar and make herself a cocktail. So she helped herself, had a drink. Oh yeah, there were video cameras. Seller watched the whole thing. She wound up in a disciplinary action in the e-bulletin. Why? Because she didn't respect the seller's stuff. She didn't respect the sellers. Y'all, this is the fun thing about this industry. I don't have to make stuff up. This stuff actually happens. Yeah, wait till after the showing to have a drink. Thank you. You know, wait and have your cocktail after. Oi.
Yeah, I have a friend who's in real estate, and she told me anytime she's showing a house that she doesn't want to be there with the family, like in the room or anything. She wants to take it like a tour, but she always keeps an eye on the buyers because she said, I'd love to trust them, but at the end of the day, they are still humans. We still lie. We still cheat. It's my
Yep.
job on the line. It's my name on the line. I'm gonna make sure they don't, do something stupid.
Right. That's right. That's right. They are my buyers. They are my responsibility. I need to make sure that they're respecting the seller's home. Y'all, this applies even after we go under contract. If the buyer wants to go back and, I don't know, take paint samples and see what color they want to paint the living room, of course I'm going to be with them. There's been cases in the past where the buyer goes to the home on their own. Sellers are sitting there in the living room watching TV and they see a buyer come up looking through the window. Y'all, that's called trespassing. They don't own the house yet. If they want to go, they need to get with you to schedule. Do they want to show it off to mom and dad? Great. But they need to be with you. They don't own the home yet. And if they're there without permission, it's called trespassing. Matthew just nailed it, didn't he? Why do we have rules? Because somebody screwed up in the past. Thank you, previous people, for ruining it for the rest of us. Believe in people, but trust no one. There you go. We could go on. I'm not kidding. Story after story after story, but you guys get the idea, right? Your buyers, your responsibilities, honor and respect is still the seller's home. Wire fraud. We saw this in the listing agreement. See it in the buyer's agency agreement. We'll see it again in the offer to purchase and contract. We'll talk about wire fraud then. I have a place for 2 buyer signatures. Again, if you have more than 2 buyers, if you have more than 2 people that want to be on this deed, we have our additional signatures addendum. You can add as many people as you want to. There's an entity buyer. You get there, the business's information. And then you have the firm's information signed by the individual agent with their license number. Exclusive right to sell. I'm sorry, exclusive buyer agency agreement. Questions?
I have a quick question.
Yep.
Talking about the entity. So signing for a company or whatever, is there any extra verification or paperwork we have to do to make sure, this person is able to sign, or is that someone else?
We may want to take those couple extra steps. Yeah. I mean, you may have the partners reach out to you, but ultimately the partners are going to say, or the owners or however they're set up, but they got to designate one person to sign on behalf of.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
if somebody calls you and says, Biz, you're going to may want to look into it a little bit, right? Do a little bit of research. I think what I'm hearing your question is, do we verify the person that's signing is the person that's allowed to sign? And that's going to be part of the partner, the operator's agreement, right? How that's set up, how that's structured. So yeah, do a little bit of research, just to, nothing else, to protect yourself on closing day, right? Okay. All right, y'all get your private chat ready. Private chat to me. I guess I should specify. Private chat to me. Everybody ready? Tell me in a private chat. An agent must have a buyer agency agreement signed. 1, 2, or 3. Hint, there might be more than one right answer. They weigh in. Still coming. Gotcha. I love it when y'all follow it with a question mark. Like, are you asking me? All right, an agent must have a buyer agency agreement signed at the time we're ready to present the offer. And at the time I attempt to limit their ability to work with other agents, I can't have exclusivity. What's wrong with number one? First substantial contact is talking about what? Is referencing what? Yep. When you're talking about first substantial contact, you're talking about agency disclosure. So let's be sure we're really good. Agency disclosure and agency agreements are not the same thing. Agency disclosure does not create agency. What creates agency? Agency agreements. So what's wrong with number one? For substantial contacts, when referring to our working with real estate agency disclosure. Questions? All right, the last thing before break, when we come back from break, we get to do math. So the last thing to say before break, pages 241 and 242 is yet another little nice review on dual agency. How many ways have we given you dual agency now? Please, please, please spend time with dual agency. I think one thing we can all agree on is the obvious potential for conflict of interest. You're serving two kings equally and loyally. Is there a potential for conflict of interest? You betcha. How do I best serve my two clients? I step back as an advocate. My role changes from the coach to the referee. I make sure they get through the transaction. I cannot offer advice. And the thing about it is we make sure with dual agency, we have informed written consent of both parties. Again, that does not mean we're going to look at our buyers and sellers and say, we're going to do dual, sign here. Is that informed consent? What did you just learn when I told you that? Something about dual? Okay, I guess I have to sign. This is why we explain dual. This is why we have the explanation of dual agency in our agency agreements to help us provide that informed written consent. I can't just start acting like a dual agent without informed written consent. Questions?
Yes, one question while we're on
Huh?
dual agency. Under the paragraph on dual agency, it says that traditional dual agents are absolved from the language. Does that mean if something confidential accidentally slips or is told by the broker, you don't have that same liability? Is that what that's saying?
Where are you seeing that? I need to see it.
On 241, am I reading that right? At the bottom of 241 in that paragraph, right before the last statement, a dual agency agreement, if you jump up to that next paragraph above that, it says, when acting as a traditional dual agent, the firm's brokers are absolved by the language in the dual agency agreement from sharing confidential information about either party.
That's what it is. Even in dual, just because we're in dual, there's certain confidential information that I'm not sharing with my seller to my buyer.
Okay.
The firm is in dual. We can talk about it all day long. We shouldn't, but we can. But
Okay.
what I need to be careful about is sharing. If I have confidential information about my buyer, just because I'm in dual doesn't mean I can share that with my seller and vice versa.
Okay, got you.
Okay. So even though I'm in dual, I'm still protecting their confidential information.
Right, that's that referee point. Okay,
That's
gotcha.
right. That's right. And I'm still disclosing material facts. I never have a reason not to disclose material facts. My buyer's agent, my seller's agent, my dual agent, my designated agent, doesn't matter. Sub-agent, doesn't matter. I always have a duty to disclose material facts. Okay. All right. take a break, get your calculator. We come back, y'all, we're gonna do fun math. We're gonna tell you how to calculate your commission. Woo. 10 minutes. I should have said before we left, we're not just doing math now. We're getting ready to do your math. We're going to do some commission math and figure out how much you get paid once this thing closes. This is good math. This is fun math. Yes. And agents blow my mind. Y'all crack me up. You sit there all day long and say, I'm not good at math. I'm not good at math, until it comes to figuring out your commission. And when it comes to your commission, you could get a call about 123 Main Street. And while you're on the phone looking it up, in your mind, you are calculating how much you're going to get paid when you sell 123 Main Street. Fun math. Okay. So let me take attendance. And the first thing we're going to do, I want you guys just to take a minute. And, you know, if you're going to jot it down, do it quickly. If you want to take a picture with your phone, that might be a little bit faster too. But this is what I call the commission map. So take just a minute and either write it down really fast or take a picture with your phone, because we're going to refer back to this. We're going to reference our map and we'll talk about it. So the commission map helps us see what's happening with the money. It helps us see what's happening with the commission. And we start at the top, total commission, part of sales price. That total commission is split between the sides. So the listing side gets some of the total commission, the selling side, remember, is the side working with the buyer. So the total commission is the first split is between the two sides. Maybe it's a 50-50 split, maybe it's not. Once the side gets paid, then it's split again between you and the firm. The firm shares their commission with you. It's not your commission. Why? Because it's not your agency agreement. So the firm shares their commission with you. So the map kind of helps us see what happens to the commission, how the total commission gets divvied up. If you're working down the map, if the problem gives you, it gives you, for example, total commission, and it asks you how much the listing agent's going to take, you got to take 2 steps to get to the listing agent's commission. The first step is to determine how much the listing side is going to get. Once you determine that, then you take it another step and you figure out the listing agent. When you're working down the commission map, the steps you take to get there are to multiply. If the problem gives you the listing agent's commission and it asks you the total commission or the sales price, now you're starting at the bottom and you're working your way up. Everybody see what I'm saying? If you start at the bottom and work your way up, the steps you take to get there are to divide. Now we're getting ready to whip out the T-bar in just a second. Never fear, y'all know me. Again, use the map to help you see what's happening to this commission, the commission. Use the map to help you guide, help you see where it's going. Please look with me on page 242. 242. Is another example of what we're looking at here, a commission map. So you see, we start with a sales price of $189,000. They're charging 6% total commission. So I have a total commission of $11,340. Everybody see where I'm at on 242? That $11,340 is divided equally 50-50 split between ABC Realty and Homes Realty. So the first split is to divide the total commission between the two firms. In this case, it's 50-50, not always the case. Now that Holmes Realty has been paid half of the commission or $5,670, we're going to split that again between the firm and agent head. Right? So we started with first finding the firm's commission. Once we find the firm's commission, then we do another split between the firm and the agent. So there's your map. Let's look at our formulas. Formulas. It's 2 steps. So I'm going to have to use 2 formulas. Everybody see that? Step 1, step 2. So if I'm asking for the listing agent and the listing firm's commission, for example, it's 2 steps. So to get from total commission or sales price to the side, we're going to use this T-bar. Total commission is part of the sales price. Total commission, how commission, why is that asterisk? How commission is given to you in the problem is going to vary from problem to problem. These commission problems, they're going to work it several different ways. The best way to prepare yourself is to practice, is to work these problems so you can see the several different ways. So the problem might tell you, for example, that it's 5% total commission split equally, which is what we just looked at. The problem may also tell you that the list side gets 3%, the selling side gets 2%. So how total commission, that's why that asterisk is there. How total commission is stated, you'll have to look into the problem. We're getting ready to see some examples, of course. So this gets us to the sides commission, okay? Once we get to the side, then we're going to do another split. We're going to take the listing sides or the selling side, depending on what side you're on. We're going to take their commission and divvy it between the firm or the agent's commission. Guys, commission problems, math problems are really where they like to put the distractors. They love putting distractors in commission math problems. What's a distractor's job? To distract you. How do you not be distracted? I think this is where the map helps. If you have that map, if you can reference that map, if you can practice using the map. So let's just jump right in. Let's look at one together. Then I got a couple for you guys to work, of course. A home is listed for $230,000 and sells for $227,000, with a 6% total commission being charged. The listing firm is cooperating with the firm who produces a buyer by offering them a 2.5% of the sales price. Based on this information, what is the listing side commission? Bear with me, I forgot to set up my little whiteboard so we can all see. What you call whiteboard, I call whiteboard, you call it Microsoft Word. Same thing. Can everybody see okay? See the problem okay? You can see my whiteboard. The home is listed for $230,000 and sells for $227,000. Are we paid on the sales price or the listing price? We're paid on what it closes for, right? So right out the gate, there's a distractor. See what they like to do? Using my map, I start with a sales price of $227,000 and 6%. That is what is the top of my map. And I know that somehow that's going to get divided between the two sides. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's not. If this is the listing firm, and this is the selling firm. Everybody with me so far? We're mapping it out. We're taking the total. Now I'm going to divvy it between the two sides. The listing firm gets some, the selling firm gets some. the total 6% commission. The listing firm is cooperating with the firm who produces a buyer by offering them 2.5%. So whomever the selling side, the selling firm gets 2.5%. If they get 2.5%, how much does the listing side get? If I'm giving you 2.5%, then I get what's left, right? So the split between the listing firm and the selling firm, listing side gets 3.5%, selling side gets 2.5%. Do I have everybody so far? Total commission is 6%. On the listing firm, I give you 2.5, which means I get what's left. First step is to determine how much. Selling side is the side working with the buyer. They're selling the property. Go back to our image. We got the picture. I'll try to go back to it in a second here too. Total commission is 227,000. Listing side is getting 3.5%. So to solve this problem, what is the listing side of the commission on the sale? I take 227,000 times 3.5%. I get a total listing side commission of 7,945. I had to make the split to figure out how much the listing side was going to get. But kind of starting to see what we're doing here. I know we have questions. Let me try to go back real quick. Selling side is the side selling the property to the buyer. Selling, listing. Okay. Let's pretend for a second. Let's pretend this problem goes on to say that the listing firm let's say there's, I don't know, make something up. There's a 60-40 split. So the listing firm gets 40%. The agent gets 60%. So the problem went on to ask you, how much does the agent get? We figured out the side, right? Now we're going to take the side's commission and we're going to split it between the firm and the agent, with the firm getting 40% and the agent getting 60%. So now the calculation we're doing is we're looking at the side's commission of $79.45 and the agent split of 60%. So of that $79.45, how much is the agent getting? They're getting 60%, or $4,767. Everybody see what we did? I figured out the side split, step one, tier one. And then I took the side split and I split it again to the agent split. This is where I like the commission math a whole lot. because the commission map helps you map it out. I highly recommend you guys consider practicing and using the commission map. Get comfortable with the commission map. It helps me to see it. 40 and 60, I just made up off the top of my head. I improvised. Questions? Is commission math on the test? Absolutely. The real estate commission says, if it's in the syllabus, it's a good candidate for your test. I'm covering it because it's on the syllabus. Questions about commission math so far? The 3.5 and 2.5. So the problem tells us total commission is 6%, right? Guys, remember, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever's bringing the buyer. So total commission that the seller's paying is 6%. The listing firm has agreed to share their commission. They have agreed to give 2.5% of their commission to the firm that brought the buyer. So if I collect 6% and I agree to give you 2.5%, then I get what's left. And what's left is 3.5%. Questions so far? Practice. We're getting ready to do now. This is the very first one you've ever seen, yes?
I'm just a little confused about the selling side part. I don't get how the buying side, that's probably gonna mess me up in the question.
What's that?
The buyer is the selling side.
This is just the terminology. When we look at our offer to purchase and contract, this is the verbiage. This is the terminology that we use. The selling agent is the one selling the property to the buyer. The selling firm, they're the firm selling the property to the buyer. The buyer's agent has to sell the house to the buyer. They're selling the property. Mindy, we're getting there. Put this on a flashcard, you guys. Make sure we see this terminology, because you know what your test is going to ask you about? The selling agent, the selling firm. So we need to be able to see this, as you just said, so we can interpret these test questions. They're selling the property. Who are they selling the property to? The buyer. They're listing it for the seller. They're selling it to the buyer. Okay.
Julie, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you go back to that? The buyer and the seller? Okay, so, all right, the buyer's on one side, the seller's on the other side. Okay, so at the bottom, the selling agent, selling firm. Is that different from the seller agent, seller's firm?
Correct, which is why I have those highlighted so we can see the difference.
Okay,
Ing, seller, selling. The seller is the owner of record, right? The seller is the person that's entering into the exclusive right to listing agreement with you. The buyer's agent is selling them the property. And that distinction right there is exactly why I have that highlighted, because we need to see that difference. Versus ing.
I kind of think about it like, what am I doing for the person?
There you go.
You can only do one
You're
thing.
either
You can
listing
either
it or you're
list,
selling it. There
you
you
can
go.
only list it or you can only sell it. If you're not listing it, then you have to be selling it, which makes you a selling agent. That's
There
the
you
only
go.
way I could get it in my head.
Perfect.
I don't know if
Thank
that
you.
helps.
if you're not listing it, then you're selling it.
Yes. If you're listing it, then you're working for the seller. You've listed it, so you're a listing agent for the seller. So in my head, I was like, well, if I'm not listing it for the seller, I'm walking around with the buyer,
Gotcha.
then I am
Selling
trying
it.
to sell this house to this person.
Mhm.
I think everybody is looking at it like I was at one point. I was like, seller, all the sale needs to be with the seller. And I was getting confused. I was like, wait a
And
minute.
that's our ing versus our Ing
Yeah.
versus
Okay, I believe I got it. I think I got it. And I'll get it more once I go back and review it by myself.
And you're going to put it on an index card, yes?
Absolutely.
Again, you guys, when we look at our offer to purchase and contract, this is the terminology we're going to see: selling and listing. So this is not me being mean. This is day-to-day stuff, right? Who are you? Like Mindy said, thank you. Who are you? Are you walking around listing it for the seller? Or are you selling it to the buyer? You're selling it versus being the seller. Okay. All right. Give you guys, I'm gonna put one up, give you guys about 5 minutes, put paper to pencil, try something, use your commission map and try something. So I'll give you about 5 minutes. We'll come back together and talk about it. Can you see that? You've got 30 more seconds, and then we'll talk about it. You guys get some really, could you map it out? Could you start to map it out? I think that's a big part of it, is to see where this is going, see what direction this is going. So let's talk about it and see what we got. What do you do very first when you see a math problem? You just pick up your calculator and start punching a bunch of numbers in it and seeing what they do? No. First, you just read it. Just read it. Elizabeth lists a property for sale. Her firm has a written policy of charging 7% on all transactions. The listing firm has agreed that they will cooperate with the firm that brings the buyer by offering them 3% of the total sales price. Elizabeth's commission split is 70% based on this information. How much commission will Elizabeth earn if the property sells for $285? So with commission math, I always suggest you just map it out. At the top, I have the sales price. And I have the total commission. From here, that is going to get split by the firms. The listing side is going to get some. The selling side is going to get some. Once we find the listing side, we're going to take that and do another split, aren't we? We're going to split the listing side's commission between the firm and the agent. So that's our visual, that's our map. We're starting at the top and are working our way down, ultimately to find out how much Elizabeth is going to get paid. That's your map. Everybody good so far? Questions on this so far? Okay. So 7% commission.
Julie?
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
Up at the top, at the beginning, you have an L and an S.
Listing and selling, the two sides.
Wouldn't it be listing and buying? No?
You have one side that's listing the property. They're walking around with the seller listing the property.
So the listing side is this, that's why I'm confused, because it seems like the listing side is the selling side.
The listing side is working with the seller. They're listing the property for the seller.
So what
The
does the
side-
S represent up here?
What is what?
What does the S represent underneath your
Sell.
7%?
Selling. That's
Selling,
the side.
which
That's
is the buyer,
side selling the property
The
to
firm.
the buyer.
the firm, the selling firm.
It's the two sides. So back in our book on 242, it's ABC Realty and Homes Realty, the listing side and the selling side.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so total commission is 7%. The listing firm has agreed they will cooperate with the firm that brings the buyer by offering them 3%. So how much is the selling side getting? The side working with the buyer, they're getting 3%, which means the listing side is getting how much? If the selling side is getting
4%.
3%, then the listing side is getting 4%. I took the total commission and I divvied it between the two sides. Listing side to get 4%, selling side to get 3%. Questions so far? So how much is the listing side getting? How much is the listing side getting? Step one is to figure out the side's commission of the total sales price. The listing side is getting 4%. So when you take 285,000 times 4%, the listing side is getting a commission of 11,400. Once it closes, you're going to go to the attorney's office and you're going to pick up a check made out to the listing firm for $11,400. Step one. Everybody with me? Questions so far? So now the listing side is going to take their commission and split it between themselves and the agent. The listing side has been paid. Of that $11,400, now they're going to share it between them and the agent. Of that $11,400, they're going to give 70% to Elizabeth, which means they're keeping 30% to themselves, right? Elizabeth's commission split is 70%. So once the side has been paid, now we got to pay Elizabeth. So now the next step, is to figure out the last step, actually. Elizabeth's commission. She's paid off of the side's commission. The listing side got 11,400. Elizabeth gets 70% of that. So how much is Elizabeth going to get? 11,400 times 70%. $7,980. The check you receive from the firm, are taxes taken out? Nope, because you're 1099. But don't worry, Uncle Sam is standing there at the end of the year with his hand out. Don't you worry about Uncle Sam. He will get his money. It's one thing we know for a fact, right? What questions do I have? Guys, this is why when it comes to commit, you got, because they're all worded differently. We're getting ready to look at another one, but they're all worded differently. And the best way I can prepare you guys for your exam is to practice. Practice, practice, practice. Practice, practice, right? Some of them are going to give you total commission. Some are going to tell you the side. Some are going to tell you this. I'm going to tell you that. They're all worded just a little bit differently. Use the map as your visual. Use the map as your aid. Questions before I erase? It's gone forever. Okay. You want to do another one? Sure. Again, take about 5 minutes. Do something, at least map it out. And then we'll come back and talk about it. About 30 more seconds and then we'll talk about it. Before we talk about it, a question come in about the amount of math that's on your exam. Guys, as we said, the math alone can't fail you. So there's not enough math to fail the exam. I don't want you guys to hurt yourself over the math. If you can get some of the math to give yourself some extra points, fantastic. You can miss all the math and still pass the exam. If you can get some of the math, maybe if math isn't your thing, you just focus on some of it. Try to get commission math. Y'all wait, we get into units 14 and 15, financing units, you know what comes along with financing? Math. 14, 15, and 21 are definitely our heavy math units. All right. Julie's real estate shop is listing a property for sale with an agreement from the seller to pay 6% of the sales price. Listing firm agrees to compensate the selling firm with 40% of the total commission. How much will Julie's real estate shop collect on the transaction if the home sells for $300,000? So starting at the top of our map, who remembers what we said the word of means in a word problem? When you see of in a word problem, what does that mean?
Multiplication.
Multiply. So look for your key words. I don't know how to read problems. There's key words that help tell you what to do. So when you see of, we know that that means multiply. Listing a property. Let's see, we sold it for $300,000, 6% from the commission, from the sales price of the sales price. The listing firm is going to get 40% of the total commission. I'm sorry, the selling firm, excuse me, the selling firm is going to get 40%, which means the listing firm will get 60%. Right? We're going to take the total commission and we're going to divvy it. We're getting 40% of the total commission. So in order to calculate of the total commission, I first have to find what that total commission is, don't I? This is what I mean by they're all worded just a little bit differently. So 40% of what? Of the total commission. What's that saying? 40% times the total commission. How do I find the total commission? It's 6% of the sales price. So step one, in this case, is to find the total sales price. So I take 300,000 times 6%, and I get a total commission of $18,000. That $18,000 is now going to be divvied 60% to the list side, 40% to the selling side. Questions so far? So I know my total commission. I know the listing side is going to get 60% of the commission. So how much are we at Julie's Real Estate Shop going to collect? 18,000 times 60% gives us a commission of $10,800. This is what I mean by they're all different. The first one, it told us what the split was, 3.5, 2.5. This one, it tells us of the total commission. This is what I mean by they're all different. And this is where, trust me, practicing comes into play. The more you practice, the more you're going to expose yourself to the different way that these problems can be tackled. Questions? Everybody see the map? We're going to practice with it. I wish I'd have saw more heads, Bob. Are we going to spend our entire weekend doing commission math? No. Don't forget about dual agency this weekend too, right? The selling firm gets 40%. The firm selling the property gets 40%, which means the listing firm gets whatever's left. So if the selling firm gets 40%, the listing firm gets 60. Is there practice? Of course there's practice. Did y'all just meet me? Everybody, I want everybody to do something for me this weekend. Make a flashcard. The buyer works with the selling agent, the selling firm. The seller works with the listing agent and the listing firm. I want everybody to put those on flashcards because we got to see them. What do you think your test is going to ask you? Selling, listing. I'm trying to prepare you for the exam. I could make this really easy. I could just refer to the buyer's agent. You get to the test and you're seeing selling agent for the first time. Are you happy? Probably not. We're working all the kinks out before test day, right? So y'all make a flashcard on that, please. We've got to see that. Listing firm gets up. Sometimes it's a 50-50 split. Sometimes it's not. This is just this particular example. Breathe. Why don't we take a big deep breath together? I got tear emojis coming in on the chat. Everybody just stop. Just stop. Everybody ready? Let's breathe together. Did I ever stand here and say you had to have commission math perfected by the time we leave at 1 o'clock today? No. What did I tell you got to do to get commission math? Practice, 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 practice. List it with the listing firm. Sell it with the selling firm. Sell it by the selling firm. There we go.
May I say something?
I'm going to let you go back. I've been here 3 times today, guys. I'm so sorry, but please go back and look at that slide. The selling is working with the buyer. The selling firm is selling the property to the buyer. Can somebody else help me out? I apologize, but I don't know another way.
Think about a car dealership. If you go to a car dealership and a salesman comes out, you are buying the car. What is he doing for the car to you? He's selling it to you. So you are the buyer, but the person that's helping you, the agent that's helping you, is selling the car to you. So think about what the agent is doing. They can only be listing the home or selling the home. So if you are a buyer, your agent is selling, you own that home. If you are a seller, the agent is listing it. So they are the listing agent. So I have to think about it like, if I'm the agent, right? I'm either a listing agent who's listing the property for the person selling it, or I am a selling agent who is selling it to a buyer. I'm trying to get that buyer to buy it, so I'm selling. I know this is the only way I could get it in my head, was to think about a car dealership or what I'm doing with that person. I can only list it for the seller or sell it to the buyer. And if I'm selling it to a buyer, I'm a selling agent. If I'm listing it, I am a listing agent for a seller. I don't know if that helps.
I like the car dealership analogy. Thank you. Guys, please spend time with this weekend. I am going to cut out. I don't have time to do another problem today, so we're going to cut. Hang on though, just a second. We need to talk about a few things. When we come back on Tuesday, I got a little bit more commission math to cover. We're going to talk about seller net math. So we're just about ready to wrap up Unit 8. Please, please, please look ahead at Unit 8, the rest of the math that we have left to cover. We'll do that first thing Tuesday morning. Then we got to keep going. So next week, we're going to go through Unit 9. We're going to get in Unit 10. We very well may get started on Unit 14. So I ask that you guys please look ahead. Please listen to what I'm about to tell you. Units 14 and 15 are our financing units. So we're going to do 9, we're going to do 10, and then we're going to do 14 and 15. 14 and 15 tend to be a problem topic for students because we're now going to switch over to lender class. So we're going to have to wear a lender's hat when we go into Unit 14 and 15. I beg you to look ahead at 14 and 15 this weekend, start seeing some of this stuff. There's a lot of math in 14 and 15. It's financing. Doesn't that make sense? So look ahead at the math. There's the math concepts. When you're doing the practice, Unit 8, there's some math problems, 250, 251 at the end of Unit 8. Just keep in mind, we have not done seller net math yet. So if you come across those problems this weekend, don't worry about it. We'll get to it next week. Also in Learn, Test, Pass, the Unit 8 material, there's some additional commission math there for you as well. So you're going to see something called graduated sales commission. We haven't covered that yet. Don't worry about that. We'll do that Tuesday morning. Don't worry about seller net math yet. We'll do that Tuesday morning. So you can study, you can do most of Unit 8, okay? But we'll do graduated sales commission on Tuesday, and we'll do seller net on Tuesday. And then we leave agency behind us, and we go into 9 and 10, which are our contract units. Okay, so please look ahead. And like I said, by the end of next week, we'll probably get started on Unit 14. Questions? And by the way, in Learn, Test, Pass on Unit 8, I got that slide. Everybody's going to make a flashcard, 2 flashcards on this weekend, right? Everybody promise me, Julie, I promise. Make 2 flashcards, one for the seller, one for the buyer. We've got to be able to see this. Questions? Then do it again. It's repetition. Did anybody, I leave you with this. Did anybody ever get in trouble in school and you had to go to the blackboard and write, for example, I will not talk in class 100 times? I can't be the only one. Anybody else ever? I will not throw spit wads. I will not, whatever it is you got. Anybody ever have to do that? Why did they make you go to the board and write that 100 times? So the next time you went to talk in class, you thought twice about it. Why? Because it was that repetition of writing it over and over and over again. They were making it stick in your head that throwing spit wads was not appropriate. So they made you write it over and over and over again. It's the beauty of repetition. Write it down again, write it down again, make a flashcard, quiz yourself. I'm here all weekend. If you guys have questions, please do not hesitate to let me know. Everybody have a great weekend. breathe, and I will see you on Tuesday. I'm here for questions. Yep.
So Julie,
Yes.
okay, so